Yeah, I think so.
Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I call this meeting to order for the Brawley City Council successor agency to Brawley Community Redevelopment Agency. Special meeting agenda for Monday, April 23rd at 5 p.m. We can have the roll call, please.
The minutes will reflect all council members present.
All right, thank you. If you could all rise, please, for our invocation by Councilmember Luke Hamby.
All right, let's pray. God Almighty, we thank you this evening for this opportunity to come together and work on this budget. We ask that you would give us clarity of thought and that you would guide our conversation this evening so that we can make wise decisions in a position of leadership for this city. We ask that you would watch over our city, keep our residents safe, keep our law enforcement safe. Pray this in Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you very much. Our Pledge of Allegiance led by Councilmember Couchman, please.
Okay, ready? Begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Couchman, and thank you, Councilmember Hamby. The next item on the agenda is the approval of the agenda. Is there a motion to approve the agenda as written?
So moved.
There's a motion.
Second.
There is a second. Any questions, comments? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Next item on the agenda is item 2, public appearances and comments, not to exceed 4 minutes. This is the time for the public to address the council on any item not appearing on the agenda that is within the subject matter jurisdiction of the city council. The mayor will recognize you when you come to the microphone. Please state your name for the record. You are not allowed to make personal attacks on individuals or make comments which are slanderous or which may invade an individual's personal privacy. Please direct your questions and comments to the city council. Is there anyone here who would like to make a public comment? You could please come up to the microphone to your left, please.
Hello. My name's Jean Pantaleo. Some of you may recognize the name because I wrote some letters, and I'm here today to follow up on my inquiry about a possible discount for senior citizens or people on fixed incomes below a certain income for the water, trash, sewer bill. I have not heard anything except it was going to be discussed, and I'm hoping that you have some information because this inquiry was from last year, around June or July.
Ms. Petaleo, thank you for your comment. Any comment from our city manager
So,
with respect to?
it may be helpful, Ms. Pantaleo, to know that our rate structure is published as part of a very lengthy hearing process, so we don't have the ability to modify rates. That's why you were encouraged to come to the general fund workshop, because as council may recall, when requests for discount were presented as part of the Prop 218 process, we were advised that the water and sewer enterprise, the pot of funds that we use to pay for water and sewer, we cannot offer discounted rates that the rest of ratepayers who receive the same service, they can't carry that cost. And the reason we directed you to the general fund workshop is because if the city wished to proceed with a discounted rate, they'd have to pay from the general fund to the water and sewer enterprise to offset any rate reductions.
Why is our city so high, our city bill so high compared to other cities?
Actually, part of our Prop 218 rate hearings, we did do a comparison to other jurisdictions in the valley, and we are certainly not the highest agency. Everything that's featured in a rate structure is tied to capital projects that are a part of the water distribution and sewer collection system.
Well, I'm also considering what Yuma residents pay for their water,
yes.
trash, sewer, which is a whole lot less. And so
that's true.
I just wondered why the cost was so high with our rates, why we're in a comparable area. And
I think the regulatory environment in California is very different from our neighboring state of
So-
Arizona.
what you're saying is don't look for any discounts.
No, what I'm stating is this is the general fund workshop today, and this is the time at which the council has the option to consider making payments out of the general fund into the water and sewer enterprise if they wish to proceed with senior discount rates.
All right.
Right, so
Right,
Could we, is there a time limit that we'll know one way or the other?
well, just to go back to your comment, Ms. Pantaleo, today is the day to make that request if you're making that request, so it's the
Oh,
right time to
okay,
do
I
it,
understand.
okay? And so this is when it would be considered. If council chooses to consider that and move it forward, it would be today.
I appreciate
Okay?
it. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
And just for everybody's information, I think we've had this discussion, and we've kind of gone over it a couple different times. One of the things was that the funding restricts us somewhat in terms of rate reductions. However, we can look at that. The question I think comes up is, I think we've got to analyze, what do we want to do with that, and how would we go about doing that? And then look at age groups, and then is it going to be confined to age, or is it going to be related to income levels? And then how do you do that? It does become you have to have a policy in place, and you have to have all those details in there. So I think it's something that we can discuss for the future. We might discuss it tonight.
Thank you. Is there anyone else from the public who'd like to make a comment or has a public comment here? Seeing none, we'll move on to item 3, and that's the consent agenda. Items are approved by one motion. Council members or members of the public may request consent items be considered separately at a time determined by the mayor. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda as written?
I'll make a motion.
There's a motion. Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
There's a second. Any discussion, any questions? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Next item on the agenda is item 4, regular business 4A, discussion potential action to adopt resolution number 2018- resolution of the City Council of the City of Brawley, California, amending fiscal year 2017-2018 City of Brawley budget for the Brawley Parks and Recreation Department in the amount of $34,880. Backup material is on pages 24 through 26, and it's going to be presented by Marjo Mello.
Yes, ma'am.
Good evening, Marjo Mello, wearing a leafy hat for Parks and Rec
Leafy hat.
today. Leafy hat.
I can see it,
It's
yeah.
no books or anything,
Right.
it's just leafy hat.
All right.
The items before you are items that are needed this fiscal year, and each one has as we've known from the last meeting, the heating of the pool has become a very big topic. We have an estimate of between $3,000 and $5,000. We will not have a firm number till Thursday, when NOR Company can come to work on that. We're also requesting chemicals to put back into our budget, the amount that was spent on the splash pad for last summer and the upcoming summer, and we've started this fiscal year again, so we're asking for that amount. We're also asking, in order to let the chemicals work and keep the splash pad operational, we're asking for expensive fencing. It's a one-time cost. It should work for multiple years, and the fencing can be used for other things. We have an upcoming gallery night that we're all excited about that's going to have an art show, and we're going to be using some panels that are fencing. And this would also make another way for something to be out. If we had something that was a statue or something big physical, we could put a fencing around it. So there's multiple uses for this kind of fencing.
Okay. Is that 6 foot? Oh, it's bike rack style. Okay.
It's bike rack style.
Okay. Yeah.
Right. It just
Yeah.
directs people to go through and
Right.
rinse off before especially the grass and sand before they get to the splash pad. Okay. Any other questions?
Often used for crowd control at concerts and other things.
Yes.
Okay.
Marcia, I think you omitted a description of the AC needs.
Oh, I'm sorry. We have 2 AC needs. The office at the Lions Center has been wonky with AC for how many years? For about 3 years. And it can get very hot in the summer, as we know. And people are there 8 to 5 Monday through Friday. People also come into the lobby. So that's needed, and we're hoping to be able to get it for $4,990, kind of a deal. And the other thing is something else that was brought up at the last meeting about the air conditioning at Soto Field where the snack bar
Volunteer
is.
Park, right.
Right,
Volunteer.
for the snack bar for the Little League. And one of the solutions that I think is the cheapest is to buy a portable air conditioner that can be moved upstairs or downstairs, depending on which one they need. Sorry. And that's the other issue that we looked at. It needs a 5-ton unit if it's actually replaced, and those do run in the $4,990 range.
Yeah.
The repairs are a little over $1,700. But this is a little bit cheaper solution for a seasonal need.
Right, and that's what it's used for, right? And so,
Right.
as long as it doesn't walk away, it's, could be a good,
That's always
the
a
risk you
scary
take.
concern.
yeah. Okay.
Mr. Mayor, I have a question on that one. On that $900 portable air conditioner, normally those portable air conditioners are for a certain amount of cubic feet.
Right.
So is that adequate? The one that you're looking at, is that enough to cool that place down? And-
Actually, it would be 2 smaller units that would be able to cool it down.
So
Right.
2
They
portable
generally,
units.
they generally run about $400 per
Right.
unit
Yeah.
for, what do they call it? I forget the BTUs on it or whatever it is.
Right, right.
But I've got several of those, but they usually run enough to, like a 9-by-10 room, something
Right.
like that.
Yeah.
But you're probably gonna have to have 2
Two
for that
for that
size.
space
And
is
it will
what
get
we were looking
warm.
at.
It will just keep it livable, probably.
And
No, they
it'll be
actually-
comfortable
they
for.
can get pretty cold.
They do pretty well.
Yeah,
but
I've used them.
not
For
once
us
I-
during
Yeah.
the season, during the summer season, and then not be used probably during the winter, is that
And
the?
then you put them aside
that's the
slowly.
idea?
Yes,
and then-
that's the idea.
As
Okay.
long as they don't walk away.
Yeah, that's.
It
the
works.
Chain them
concern.
down or put them in a cage.
I guess they could.
And I don't know
bolt it
how much
down or
cages
something.
cost, but we
Yeah, I
can.
know. I know, there you
But
go.
yeah, that's another solution.
Or you could just
But
stand
it-
guard the
Yeah,
entire
yeah,
summer.
I
What do you think,
could-
no?
yeah, that might be willing to
Maybe
do that.
several chains with little bowling balls on the end, so it's
Yeah,
harder
that's-
to lift, yeah.
Well,
there's-
I think you just have to watch so people don't borrow them or that they
Oh.
move them out of that location. Maybe what you do is you have a lock cabinet, you put like a closet, you put them in there, you lock them, then you bring them out, you know. I mean, that might be the way you're gonna have to handle that.
Or put a sticker on it like Guitar Center used to have, bought or stolen from the Guitar Center.
Yeah.
Well, we can always barcode it with a library barcode.
Yes.
True, there you go.
Yeah, and check
But
it
then you'll
out,
get a
and
late
check
fee
it
here.
out to the Little League, and then
All right.
check it back in.
This
Are
is-
there any other
I do have one.
questions?
This is probably getting off in the weeds, but do you know the square footage of the snack bar at Volunteer Park?
I don't, but Miguel might, because he knows everything. Miguel, do you know the square footage of the snack bar at Volunteer Park?
Not at this point.
Could you guess?
Guesstimate about 400.
Square feet, you think so?
I would-
That would be pretty large, yeah.
450 square, on the bottom and the top.
Yeah.
One of the things that I don't know.
Could, Miguel, could you
This
please
one?
come up to the
Come up.
microphone? Thank you.
400 square feet.
That's about right. It's about 20 by 20.
Yeah.
It's probably about 20 by 20.
It'll cool it.
It'll cool
With
it.
2 units,
Two
uh-huh.
units will cool it.
Yeah, because each one is about 200.
My bedroom's about that big. and-
This is the expert on what we need.
All right.
Miguel Perez, Parks and Recreation, Parks Coordinator. One of the things on that unit, on the volunteer, it's a split unit. So if you go with a whole repair system, it will double the price to comparison of a 5-ton, just single unit, because it's just gonna be for one room. Well, this one, you can control the top temperature and the bottom temperature. So it's a fancy unit, and it does go up on price.
Is it a mini split?
No. No, it's a 5-ton outside unit with inside whole blower and all that stuff.
Okay.
So the price does go up because they're fancy and to controlling temperature.
And-
Sure.
And that repair is estimated at
Yeah,
almost
that
$2,000.
repair is for the compressor.
Almost 2,000.
Yeah.
The compressor's out, so that repair is a compressor, expansion valves, replacement of gas, because it has the old style gas.
Yes.
So they will go to the new style of gas and labor.
See, my thought, is if it is $1,700, $1,800, whatever it is, that's, 900 more than the 2 units, and now you fixed it, and
Yeah.
hopefully, you
And
know, it lasts.
hopefully,
Long term.
we were estimating, guesstimating 2 to 4 years.
Yeah.
Of life?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's not going to be much.
But
I
that's
just-
at
I
least 3
just don't-
seasons.
I just don't, I mean, we've bought one of those portables for our garage, and I'm not too keen on cooling down, especially when it gets to 120 degrees out here.
And
using
especially,
those
especially
portables?
when they don't keep the doors closed all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
So
you're right,
that-
because they do get cold as long as you don't let it draft in. I mean,
Right.
that is true.
There may be
yeah.
a lot of wasted energy.
Would there be consideration by council to consider the repair instead of the 2 portable units?
I would be in favor of that, I
Yeah.
think.
Yeah,
the
I
repair
think that's money
on
better
longer
spent.
term.
Okay.
I do want to note to council that we are anticipating that we've got some issues at the teen center as well. So knowing that a request will be forthcoming in the not-so-distant future as we relocate some of our users into
Understood.
that space while the senior center is worked on. Just hoping that council will consider
Yeah.
that request as well.
All right.
Okay.
So is there a motion to
Do
approve
we
this
need
item?
this increased? Do we need to give?
Well,
Need
we'll
to
just
increase
make the motion changing
For the by $900, right?
yeah, right.
17, 13.
From
17.
purchasing to the repair estimate of 171373.
Thank you.
I'll
Is there,
make that motion.
there's a motion to approve the item changing the $900 purchase of the portable units to repair for 171373.
And I'll second it.
There's a second to that. Any further discussion? Any questions? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you guys very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marjo.
Pat Dorsey's spirit lives on.
There you go.
That's good.
All right. Thank you very much.
Well, I hope she's still around.
Next item on the agenda is regular business discussion and potential action to approve a consulting services contract in the amount of $33,900 with Somas for the Pilot Flying J Travel Center hydraulic analysis to be 100% reimbursed by said developer. Pages 27 through 41 is the backup material, and Guillermo Cias will present the information to us.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, Guillermo Sillas, Public Works Director. As described on the material of the agenda, this is a development that is located on the southwest corner of Highway 111 and Main Street. And during the design and investigation to the point of connection for the water of this new development, it was discovered that at the 2 proposed point of connections, there's several utilities, and during collecting some of the preliminary information, it was considered as 2 very difficult points to connect. And there were developed some alternatives to alternate points of connection, but it is required to do a further analysis regarding modeling for the whole subdivision. Since this company, Somas, prepared a master water and sewer plans for the city, they have all the modeling infrastructure, digital modeling, so it will be very cost-effective to use this company to prepare this analysis to identify additional point of connection as feasible, and so that's why we are recommending to enter into an agreement with this this consultant, and in the amount of $33,900 that will be 100% reimbursed by the developer.
This
So-
afternoon, we did receive a FedEx with the deposit value of $33,900. We are hopeful that we can get results in the next 7 to 10 calendar days.
Perfect.
So you're looking for 7 to 10.
All right.
Okay, guy's
Go ahead.
question, Mr. Mayor. If this works, this is an alternative for them that makes it a quicker process, right? In other words, we're speeding up the process for them. If this doesn't, if the analysis does not bear out that it can handle that, then we go back to square one and
Well, the 2 alternatives are concurrently being investigated. The consultant is engaging one of the local contractors to do the investigation, but at the simultaneously, we are going to have this analysis for the alternate port of connection. if this secondary point doesn't work, so we're hoping that it is possible to connect to the original option, but it will be subject to what they find during the investigation, excavation, and exploration. So we have two alternatives. This afternoon, I got a call from the designer saying that in one of the point of connection, they were able to identify one stub out that it will be probably not in conflict with most of the utilities, just with the canal of the IID, which is very common. So we're hoping that at least one point of connection is kind of a result. And for the other point of connection, we have still the original alternative plus this that will be identified by SOMAS.
So we're taking simultaneous tracks, and hopefully one of these will work, and then we can move forward with that, right? Is that
correct?
And and time's of the essence.
Right, per our last project team conference call, we are moving forward assuming the most costly scenario. So
Okay.
the improvement plans and the engineer's estimate of probable cost and quantity will be for the highest value, hoping that the San Diego State alternative is ultimately the fix for the whole plan area as the points
Right.
of connection. But if it's not, we're protected from the point of view of bonding for the offsites. That worst case scenario, very crowded. It can be accomplished, it's just very crowded. And so it's not an easy
Not an
solution.
easy thing to do.
So much so that they were willing to parallel track this other investigation to see if it's just faster and easier to build, construct, and occupy.
Okay.
Questions?
I do have a question about the deposit. Do you know what's the amount of their deposit?
It's
$33,900
$33,900
And that is
received in
what they're-
full and on deposit with the finance department today.
Okay. I'd like to make a motion to approve the proposed professional services agreement with SOMAS for amount not to exceed $33,900.
There's a motion. Is there a second to that
Second.
motion? There's a second. Any discussion? Any further questions? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, the next item on the agenda is item 5, General Fund Workshop number 1. So it's 5A, presentation, discussion, and staff direction. It will be led by our city manager, Rosanna Bayonmo. Thank
And
you.
if any members of the public are interested in presentation content, we have the slides as well as our worksheets that are the basis for the numbers. They are available up here. So good evening, Mayor, Council, and community members. The purpose of today's special meeting, we first want to express our thanks for your willingness to take a couple of business items that weren't necessarily planned before the workshop content. So what I have are about a dozen or so slides that I'd like to run through. I have lots of additional data, if you're interested in data points, but what I'm trying and hoping for is to give you a high-level presentation that gives you the kinds of content you need so that you can provide staff with direction as we continue to work on next year's budget. So the goal of tonight is to talk about the foundation of the model that is before you, give you our best projections based on our research and investigation, test what we are building in as assumptions, make sure that the expenditure projections are consistent with where the council wishes to go, and acknowledging our financial constraints. We hope to receive feedback and your direction. We hope to answer questions tonight, but if we're unable to answer them on the spot, identify and further research them for items to come back to you. So what are our basic assumptions? As you know, we've gone through some pretty significant transitions this year. And so at this stage of the budget process, we're working to provide reliable projections that are part of the foundation document. So within the expenditure end of the universe, want to make sure you know, we are assuming that we're going to honor our MOU commitments. We're not adding any staff, although strategic planning discussions and other requests throughout the year have included many requests for different ways of doing things, different ways of structuring departments. The only exception for the addition of a staff member is incorporating a police chief, which we're on schedule to address before the close of this fiscal year. We're holding on all the prior city council directives and commitments, and I want to make sure they don't get lost along the way because they were very important discussions that occurred at the city council level. We are not moving forward in the current assumptions with 50% staffing of our fire station number 2 with permanent employees. We are not converting the graffiti abatement worker from a temporary status to a permanent status, and we are not converting the senior center coordinator to a permanent, from a temp to a permanent. With reference to the school resource officer positions, you may recall after budget adoption last year, we had a request come forward knowing that our grant was going to expire as of December 31, and council moved forward with a arrangement to get us through June 30 of 2018. And at that time, we communicated to both Brawley Elementary School District and Brawley Union High School that we were seeking additional grants to see if we could secure the funding for school resource officers. But unless there was cost recovery associated with the individuals assigned to the elementary school district or the high school, that the positions would be eliminated in the future. At this time, I am able to report that the city's in receipt of formal communication from Brawley Union High School that they would like to retain their school resource officer, and they will commit to 100% cost recovery. Council may be familiar with some of the discussions that have been occurring with the Brawley Elementary School District. I have Interim Chief Brown and I both sat with Jaime Silva, the superintendent of Brawley Elementary School District, and became acquainted with some of their pursuits of alternatives. There's a desire to retain the school resource officer, but they're not certain that they will do it in the format that we currently have. So it may not be an employee of the city of Brawley, it may be another public safety agency, maybe private security. They're still examining their alternatives. I explained with reference to timing what our budget process is, and they're not able at this time to commit. So the model currently assumes that that position has been eliminated. At our last city council, maybe 2 meetings ago, the council took action to approve the demonstration. Yes, sir.
Just to back up.
Yes.
And just to be specific on elimination, it's eliminating the dedicated SRO potentially to the elementary school, but not eliminating that actual law enforcement officer. In other words, that
the human being,
the position will go away,
right,
but
the human being will occupy a vacant police officer position.
That's right.
And be absorbed back into the organization and part of patrol, not part of the school assignment.
Right.
And I have just also a question, Mr. Mayor.
Sure.
When you say 100% cost recovery on the UHS, is that include all benefits and everything?
Yes.
Okay.
It does. It's a fully burdened rate. We've given them the worst case scenario from the point of view of a classic member. What's likely, depending on the composition and who gets assigned, many of our officers are now Pepper employees, so they're going to experience not the worst case scenario from a cost, a financial impact point of view, but something lesser than that.
Okay.
And it's understood that if the city, for whatever reason, needs to pull that individual back into a patrol team or something specific going on in the city of Brawley that requires their attention, the city would be responsible for the time and days that are assigned to city work. And the time and days, they'll be wholly devoted in concept to the school district, but in times of need,
We could pull them.
correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so with reference to the code enforcement officer, we had a budget adjustment before the council and an approval to move forward with a 6-month demonstration. We're currently advertising for that job, and we are expecting, worst case, for next fiscal year to carry 5 of the 6 months if our hire isn't complete until June of this year. So if there are more questions, so the worst case is that it doesn't get accomplished in the month of May, recruitment and hire, and instead rolls into the later time in the fiscal year. But 5 months are accounted for in the budget. We are also proposing that we hold on the Parks and Rec Director position. As you know, Pat Dorsey retired after cattle call last year, and we entered into interim arrangements for oversight that began with our finance director and are currently with our library director. As we go a little bit further into the presentation today, I think you'll understand exactly why we're not assuming this position in the future, due to the gap between revenues and expenditures and our inability to fund the position as it was previously configured. And we're also assuming for the time being, unless action or direction otherwise, that the communications associate is not moving forward. So if either of those positions move forward, we need to add it back in and then look at what effect it has on the budget.
I would still want to see what the communications associate position would look like with respect to policy. I know we look at
Yes.
that, but then
And
just
we're moving
job
it.
description and then to see if there's interest amongst council to move forward with that. So let's just keep that.
Moving forward, we do
Moving.
have policies
Yeah.
drafted, and we're
Yeah.
working with our city attorney. Risk management and legal counsel are working through those policies, and we're happy to bring those to you
Thank
when
you.
they're ready. The last bullet there is all department requests, even if it's the cost of doing work and supplying our work and their known estimates that are underfunded this fiscal year, those are not assumed in next year's budget. And the reason they weren't is because we first needed to assume status quo, and that's what's into you tonight. And then we'll continue honing and working based on council direction. There is one single exception when it comes to upward adjustment, and that is for the library. It is my recommendation that we augment our temporary salaries by $15,000 at the library in order to free up Marjo to give the time needed to Parks and Recreation. And so she is asking for an augmentation that would allow for that to occur so that we had some outside temporary help in that realm. So the only increase that you're going to see in line items that are outside of our MOU commitments, our normal merit increases or contract obligations, the only one you're going to see in here is for the library. So things like the chemicals needed for the splash pad, not assumed. Okay, so if I could maybe dust off all of our minds a little bit as to what we did to make it work in 17-18, because I think if we're fresh, if we can freshen up what occurred last year, we can understand our position today. Last year, through some creative approaches to revenues, we were able to capture $128,025 in special law enforcement funds to offset eligible expenses. So expenses that would have otherwise been carried by the general fund, we were able to use law enforcement funds for. We chose to delay the hire of a police chief. That was for a number of reasons, including that we did 2 runs at a recruitment, and we did not produce candidates at the back end that we were ready to move forward with. And so we moved forward with naming one of our in-house talents to the interim police chief slot, and it was agreed that that would be a no greater than 12-month commitment. And we also understood as part of the budget assumptions that the Parks and Rec Department director vacancy would not be backfilled. I've already touched on that a little bit earlier. And then we took one of our lead persons that was part of the Parks staff and designated that individual as an interim Parks coordinator to kind of mirror some of our past traditions in the city. You may recall in the years of Karen Morgan, we had a Parks supervisor and a rec supervisor. Since that time, the pay structures have changed pretty significantly, but we now have not Parks supervisors, but a Parks coordinator and a rec coordinator. And those individuals are reporting up the chain to the interim director of Parks and Recreation, who's Marjo Mello. And so last year, we did that as a method for determining, we were really reducing the number of full-time bodies devoted at the top tier in the admin structure. So we were trying to build in different capacity, and this was how we accomplished it. So last year, we worked and combed various projections, but we can tell you after looking at our audit and performance to date that our revenue projections were optimistic. Despite that optimism and what we adopted in the final budget, which was a bridge of about $393,000, that's the estimated value of reserve spending if we meet our projections, but we don't think we're going to meet our projections, and I'm going to show you what some of those reasons are and why we've come to that conclusion. Also, since the budget has been adopted for last year, we have, as a city, brought to the council $93,271 in general fund budget adjustments. And I want to be clear that that value represents both the action that you took tonight, as well as all the mutual aid. I want to make sure our chief knows that. All the mutual aid reimbursements that have come in the door. So what we've expended is actually much greater, but we've been significantly reimbursed as well. But this is our final effect. So if we hit our projections from a revenue point of view, we would add the $93,000 to the $393 to understand where our reserve stands. Mm-hmm. And then last but not least, with reference to last fiscal year, our last budget adopted, the year we're currently in, that will end June 30, we did make our second to last regional board settlement payment. But that's in addition to the $392. So now we've got reserve expenditures of $393, $93, and $133. Okay, so hopefully I haven't bored you yet. I'm going to try to keep this relevant and interesting and not lose folks in the numbers. So I first want to begin with what we've seen as restructuring opportunities as part of retirements. As you know, this fiscal year, we had the unanticipated retirement of our building official and community development services director. We seized that opportunity and worked with in-house staff, both our planning director as well as a building inspector who had been on staff with us for a number of years, to recreate the roles and relocate offices. So we took advantage of the opportunity, combined planning and community development services. We now have a development services department that is overseen by a planning director. Now we call him a development services director over the planning division, code enforcement, and building inspection. And we have an interim building official who was also an in-house staff. We didn't grow the staff and add to them. We reduced by one body. And that individual, Oscar Escalante, is working through the certification process to become a building official. We have Gordon in a contract as a director, and we know we're going to retain that structure. And with reference to the library and Parks and Recreation, we have gone through what were known retirements, but a short-term strategy, and due to our financial position, I recommend that we continue another year of the interim arrangement. I know it's been very challenging to meet all of the demands of 24-hour-a-day properties that have needs and user groups that are incredibly enthusiastic about facilities' readiness for use. But due to our budget constraints, I just don't see, while the manpower would be very much welcomed in the department and wonderful to provide, we just don't have the financial resources to accomplish it. I would also like to note I have sent a staffing outlook to council as we were experiencing numerous retirements and changes, and I would be remiss if I did not note that through the last several years we've leaned many elements of our administrative structure, eliminated many number 2 positions, and the trade-off has been that the succession planning maybe isn't the best that it could possibly be, because we are removing those number 2s that are kind of learning at the same pace, performing the work along with a director or a lead. And one of those places that I'm very concerned about is our personnel and risk management. We have a one-person department, and we have no one cross-trained. I step in as the personnel and risk manager if there is a sick day or a vacation time or anything else, and while I'm happy to do it, it probably isn't the best long-term strategy for addressing the agency's needs. And as the departments have their administrative structures leaned, there's more and more that's getting thrown the way of personnel and risk management to address, which kind of just exacerbates the workload. So while there are no assumptions to change that, I just want to make sure I do my job in pointing out that this is an area of great vulnerability that I think we need to consider in the future, some kind of an HR analyst or someone to help with the tremendous volume of paper that runs through that department. So what we're really here to talk with you about is we've got these existing service levels and everybody wants more. And more quite often translates to more resources. So, is the council wanting to fundamentally shift what those services are, or maintain the existing service levels and be willing to sideline additional requests because we're really truly at capacity with reference to workload? Based on all the assumptions that I walked through with you, our current shortfall is $747,000. And so I'm going to go into a lot more detail. I just want to be sure that you know that is that number. It is, the sausage-making process that is the budget. It hurts. It's hard. We try our best to be creative. Last year, we were very, very proud of what we were able to accomplish to get us through a very difficult time. But I think you'll see as we hone in on our projections and performance, exactly what we're concerned about is our financial sustainability going forward. I want to also note that there are endless opportunities to modernize and streamline our way of doing business, but it require investments. And because our budget is as constrained as it is, it's often very, very difficult to bring forward solutions because the cost of those investments, we won't recoup them till somewhere down the line. But not included in this presentation tonight are things like our record keeping, time clock system that we would welcome the chance to implement in our city. and we think greatly diminish the paper-intensive process that's a part of our operations. So that would require an investment in year one of approximately $25,000 with an ongoing maintenance contract that's in the realm of $15,000. Okay, so general observations, there's, in all parts of the marketplace, there's an increase in the cost of doing business. I think you'd be very proud to see as we get into the nitty-gritty that our cost of doing business, we've done a really decent job of holding down costs. You're not going to see major growth in our expenditures, but it is at the cost of incredible workload. And as we've experienced at this point, I think we're up to 14 or 15 vacancies. 14. The workload on our existing staff is considerable. So we're, working our way through it and trying to make sure that we're doing it safely and meeting community expectations. So the biggest part of our budget, and you're going to see it in a pie chart in a moment, is our people, employee compensation. And we can very reasonably predict where we're headed for next year because our MOUs govern a lot of that universe of our employees. But I do want to kind of put a placeholder in everybody's minds that we will be kicking off our labor negotiations for the next round this fiscal year. So it's hard today. Next year is going to be really, really tough. And I think you'll see as we get into the numbers exactly why. The biggest kind of point I want to underscore, aside from the current gap, is that our operational revenues and expenditures clearly do not align. So we have a gap. We need a bridge. Some might call it, we need a solution, a bold leadership, and we're looking forward to being sure we can support you with options for you to consider in the future. Without a doubt, we will not be meeting our general fund reserve policy this next fiscal year. And we didn't last year either, but through council action and some creativity, we had a resolution that came before the council to reduce it from a 15% set aside of operational expenditures to roughly 13%. Okay. So let's begin with our draft audit results. And unfortunately, we're not at the stage that we normally are at this time of year where we've already brought the final audit to you. We're working through some staffing challenges at the finance department, but we do have what we think are very, very reliable results. And the biggest punchline here is that our revenue projections are overstated by about $675,000. So that means next year at this time, we're going to be talking about how we bridged that with a reserve expenditure. So the projections that I'm going to show you are not going to change what the gap was. That we're going to use adopted budget numbers for the time being. But until then, we know that this shortfall is very likely going headed our direction next year. Okay, so what I try to do in this slide is a 5-year perspective, giving you these certain numbers first. So when I call out 15, 16, 17, 18, and 19, those are fiscal years that start in 14 and in 15, and so on down the line. Our 4 largest revenue sources are property taxes, the vehicle license fee swap, sales tax, and the utility users tax. So we only take those 4 categories. But if any of the council or members of the public are interested in any of the other revenue categories, they're on the front sheets and called out individually as entries. So we can say with certainty that at the close of 2015, the values as noted for those top 4 were known. And I won't take you through naming each of those entries. But I think what is really important to know is when you look at 17 to 18, so let's say our draft audited numbers and then what we estimated in our approved budget, we can see that we estimated a jump of just shy of $300,000 in property taxes. Our VLF swap looks like it's pretty consistent from year to year with a little bit in excess of 100,000. Sales tax in 17 versus 18. In 17 versus 16, you see a dip. And the natural question to ask is why? For the city of Brawley, fuel is a major determinant of sales tax generation. And with dipping fuel costs, that's the way we see it and experience it in the city. So from 16 to 17, we actually had a decrease in sales tax. And when you compare 17 to 18, time is going to tell whether that particular value holds that we projected, or it could be overstated or understated. That's probably the most volatile of all of the entries. And then utility user tax, you see that we're well over a $200,000 projection and perhaps not as likely to hit that target. So what's built into the model currently, I want to kind of walk through what the 2019 estimates are. We hold the line with 18 estimates at 1 point, or just under 2 million. VLF swap, same thing. Sales tax, we worked very closely with HDL, our sales tax auditor, to assist us with those projections. And the utility user tax, we took a more modest approach to assuming changes in consumption. Any questions on this slide?
Yes.
Okay.
On the utility users tax, are we considering what One World Beef might do there? Is that considered in that figure? Is that a conservative figure for that? We don't
Yes.
really know where they're going to be at. We know
Correct.
kind of where they're at the present time for as far as utility users tax go. If their consumption goes up, then that utility user tax would generally go up, and it may only go up that amount, but it might go up. And I'm showing that, your 2018 estimated 1,975,000 to 19 estimated at 1,889,000. Is there a reason for that drop on the utility user?
Oh, go ahead.
We have experienced decreases in consumption, generally speaking, across all user groups,
Right.
as water conservation has become more top of mind, as well as rate increases. It has, it's anybody's guess as to what the exact, what changes consumer behavior, but I'm sure it's a combination of both.
What do you estimate that One World Beef is currently bringing in, and what will they be bringing in at that point
I would have to
in
bring you
time?
the slide again. We did it last year.
I know we
would
did.
be, and it was not a large sum.
Okay.
And I believe we assumed their build-out to what they were communicating as an expected growth, which
And
was
it's-
modest.
And as far as gas taxes go, or sales tax, and gasoline's probably your major one there, we don't anticipate drops in prices of gas at this point in time, not in California anyway, correct? I mean, part of that is
It's-
based upon the taxes that the state of California has placed on that, but I mean, part of it is.
Well, it's
fuel
also
prices
maybe
have
a
gone up.
commodity that's difficult to predict.
Right, it is. It's very difficult. Well, sales tax are difficult to predict
Yeah.
anyway, so. I mean,
But we did it not in a vacuum. We did it with the help of HDL.
HDL.
So we think we're
You think you're close there.
we're better off than assuming growth when growth isn't there.
Okay.
Rosanna, I'm sorry to backtrack
Sure.
slightly, but
Go
the
ahead.
previous slide, it says fiscal year 2016-17 draft audit results, which is where we find out the revenue projections were overstated by 675. So, just clarify that for me. Are you saying that occurred in fiscal year 2016-17?
So, okay.
We anticipate it'll happen for 17-18.
Because we continued to be aggressive in our projections.
Okay.
So 16, 17, we had the document that I sent to you, I think, Friday, and called out, I think, page 61 is that bottom line.
Right.
It shows how we perform to our overall estimates for revenues and expenditures. So on the revenue side, we optimistically projected, and we underperformed.
So that happened in 16-17, you anticipate 17-18, and you're projecting now this new lower revenue number for
Correct.
18-19.
Assuming that 17 was, I'd be happy to prepare it for you so you can see maybe 2017 budget versus draft audited, that would probably be helpful. But those numbers are more favorable to revenues than what were realized. And when we close out this year, in June 30, it'll be, about this time, maybe a month or two earlier next year, that we'll know where we stand with the 17-18 year. So when we set up the budget schedule, we're always trying to mid-year, provide you with a mid-year update. And then prior to kicking off strategic planning, we try to bring the audit for acceptance to the council, so you know exactly where we stand. We changed our auditor after a number of years of working with them, went through a finance director change, and so we're delayed at this point and moving through all of our deliverables for the auditor to complete its work. But as I have come to appreciate, it is very rare at this stage that draft audited numbers change.
So, Rosanna, just to keep us on, or in
Yes.
particular me, on the same page, so, because we're looking at the 5-year perspective, you mentioned in an earlier slide, in the big picture slide, of the shortfall, the anticipated shortfall. But what we're feeling comfortable with is with the audited figures, now that we've gone through this next projection on revenues, we know what we're gonna be working with, and based on that, with our expenditures, we're looking at that gap in that
Correct.
shortfall. So there's, at least it's not moving forward for today's discussion, those are our set of circumstances that we're gonna be moving forward with. Okay.
I just have, I'm kind of, last year I know I raised the issue about the One World beef, that I thought our projections were understated. And so I was actually surprised to see this report for the actual amounts for the year ended June 2017, because I really expected those numbers to be higher, especially with One World Beef in operation. And instead of being higher, they're lower. So I feel
recall-
like there's something wrong there.
I recall we prepared a workshet for you and showed you the projections, and I'd be happy to bring it back to refresh everybody's understanding. But it's not it hasn't been a producer of utility user tax. They're very proud of their water conservation measures, which is fantastic. They've performed many upstream improvements. There are trade-offs.
And they're just simply not processing near the number of head of cattle on a weekly basis, is what we were used to prior to National Beef.
Right. And like I said, I'd be happy to bring that information too, because
and
I recall the
I'm just puzzled
worksheet.
by it, just puzzled
Yeah.
by the outcome of that.
I want to say, it would take, if we take a break, I would be happy to pull the worksheet, because I know I have it in last year's notebook.
Okay.
It was not,
Yeah,
they weren't large numbers.
What National Beef was consuming as far as water and producing as far as wastewater was extremely significant.
Way higher.
Right.
Yeah, much, much more significant.
It was a 400,000, at the peak of National Beef operation, it was $400,000 a year. And interesting, if you look at 15 to 16, as we were kind of untangling the numbers and what historically was going on with the city in these windows of time, our audited numbers for 15 versus 16, that's when we experienced the closure.
Yeah.
So
You can see
we
that.
were at close to 2 million, and then we dropped to 1.7.
So when did they actually start their operation again, full force, with what they have now?
November of 16?
16?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I just expected higher numbers, I don't know. Maybe I'm off on that, but I appreciate you providing that info.
Happy
Thank
to.
you.
Yeah. Okay, so when we line up where we've been with the audits, and as we move from audited years to budgeted years and revenue and expenditure projections, where we find ourselves in 15, 16, and 17 is using the general fund reserve to bridge the difference between revenues and expenditures. But I do need to note, and I don't want to bury anybody in detail, but in year 17, it's important that I point out, When council directed for funds to be set aside for a number of key projects, the biggest ones being $500,000 for the Lions Center pool, and $210,000 for the breathing apparatus replacement project. We booked those items, we took them out of the reserve and put them into the maintenance fund for safekeeping. So it shows as though the difference is 1.5 million, but we actually have half of that value sitting in the maintenance fund for delivery of those projects. So just want to make sure that you know that this isn't necessarily reserve spending for operational deficit, this is everything combined.
Right.
Capital projects plus operational expenditures. And then when we move into 2018, the current year we're in, our budget assumptions based on the revenues and expenditures and 2 capital projects that totaled $55,000, we were scheduled to use just under $400,000 of the reserve. Knowing, however, that those revenues are probably going to need to be downward adjusted, we fully anticipate that number is going to be larger. Okay, and then in 2019, the content of which we're seeking input and direction today. If we go as is with no line items adjusted except for the library, we are short $747,000. So that's our gap. Okay, so the natural question to ask is, why are we spending so much money on employees? But I want to show you, we are not growing. We're actually pretty significantly shrinking. And I can assure you for the men and women that work for the city of Brawley, they take great pride in their work. The workloads, and expectations out there are very challenging to sometimes navigate. We've tried to be very modest in our staffing plans, and I'm sure sometimes to the disappointment of council and community that we can't do more with less, and we can't add more bodies and make more things happen. But as mentioned to you previously, these are general fund only, full-time supported staffing. We are only adding one position, which is the police chief, into the general fund cost center. And when you take the universe of expenses for the general fund, we end up, and you've seen this pie chart before, just under 80% of our general fund budget is devoted to employee compensation, and the remainder is what it takes to keep the lights on and perform our work. So that is presented here in a visual format. Want to make sure I point out what the benefits of our CalPERS side fund debt restructuring were. If we hadn't have moved forward, we would have had $260,000 additional dollars in payments to CalPERS this year. We're very proud of this. Our first year savings, it really did make a big difference. We obviously still have our ongoing normal costs associated with our CalPERS contribution for Classic, a far more dollar-intensive defined benefit plan than miscellaneous, but we move forward with our universe of both Classic and PEPRA employees. This slide really intends to give a picture of how are we spending the general fund, where is it going when it relates to the work of the agency. So I do want to take a moment to talk a little bit about where the dollars land, and specifically point out and highlight that a topic in prior council discussions has always been, and it's in actually our minutes that were approved this evening, that PD is a given, public safety is a given. And what I always am encouraged from a public policy point of view is to follow the money. What does our assignment of resources reflect when it comes to the services we provide. And I think, law enforcement and public safety are more than just a given when you look at how the resources are attributed. We're at actually just under 60% for police and fire. And so that remainder, that 40%, is how we deliver everything else that we do. And, I think there are many, many people in the community that, warmly embrace that public safety is our number one priority. What I want to do is not only reinforce, obviously, all of our departments are important and the services we deliver are important, but as it becomes more costly to operate our very own police and fire departments, the stress on the rest of the system to deliver to really high community expectations, we're working with less and less every year to have the best parks in Imperial Valley, to offer the most robust rec programming that's available in Imperial County, to do community projects, which we, have had such remarkable opportunities to make things happen in Brawley by being creative and getting council support to join with community stakeholders. Okay, well, actually, before I jump to that, does anybody have questions about this particular slide?
Any questions from council? No?
No, okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so that we don't lose sight of what general fund reserve use has been for and what we've used it for other than an operational deficit, want to make sure we do our part to highlight. We've carried out and programmed a number of capital projects, and this coming fiscal year, we will make our last payment to the regional board, which, $1 million behind us. And while the reserve was depleted to accomplish that, the good news is it's going to be a fresh start. So we look forward to building our reserve once again after this obligation is fulfilled. As mentioned earlier, in prior years, the city has moved special one-time revenues into the general fund to address eligible expenses, and you'll see in that final column that's meant to capture that. So anytime we could rely on law enforcement funds, we have to cover the expense of eligible items. Okay, so here is the $10 million question. At the close of 15-16, we knew for certain we're at $3.7 million in general fund reserve. We have draft audit numbers. Those audit numbers tell us that we have expended $1.5 million out of the 3.7, which leaves us at the close of 17 with $2.2 million.
What percentage is that?
I would have to do,
Okay.
yes. If we assume our projections are correct for this fiscal year that we're in, then we're expending $392,724 and making a regional board payment. At the close of this year, we'd be at $1.7 million. If we moved forward with the budget assumptions and didn't change anything else in the model, we would be required to set aside, per our policy, $2.3 million, but we only have 1.7 available. So we've got one more payment in 18-19, which is that final payment. So you would subtract out the 133 out of the 1.7. So let's say we're roughly at 1.5. Okay. 1.5 is really where you stand with your reserve, and we will not be meeting the requirements of our policy. So with that would be what you have available to address the bridge, the $700,000 figure. You could, if council's direction was, hold the path, this is the way we want to go, assume that the reserve will absorb that value, we can move that forward. Either way, we will not be meeting the requirements of our general fund reserve policy, which is a policy that did not exist in the city before. It is absolutely within the
It's a new
council's
policy.
discretion whether you wish to honor it in the future. Okay, so what other contributions? This is always something that we have in the slides. We're assuming we stay in the California League of Cities, we stay in SCAG, we stay in CalEd, we continue to contribute $10,000 to the chamber, $5,000 to IVEDC, $5,000 to the Film Commission, and $100 a year to ICSC. Obviously, you see what the difficult position is that we're in, and today I am absolutely open, along with staff, to looking at what alternatives might be of interest to the council at a conceptual level. Are you open and interested in service level changes? Is it safe to assume that it is not in public safety, or is it in public safety? Need to hear from you on that. Are you open to looking at changes in our fee structures? We provide many, many services at no cost to our user groups. Is that something you might be open to changing? Are you open to looking at methods for outsourcing? In the past, we've outsourced a variety of activities, including street sweeping and trash service. Is that something that you might be interested in as well, if it benefits the general fund? So with that.
Thank you for your presentation.
You're
It's
welcome.
been very, very good and informative, and a lot of good information for all of us here. So thank you very much, Rosanna, for all the work that you put into it. Just for the sake of conversation, and I'll open up the discussion here, but for the sake of conversation on this particular slide, conceptual alternatives, is there, and of course, this is just for conversation, it's not anything that we're necessarily going to decide on today, but what would be some of the service level changes that we could consider as a council to help offset some of the gap that we have currently?
You're asking
Yes.
some of those. So what I would suggest and begin looking at is where our breakout is. Now, due to leaning of the agency, want to be fair and state that there's been some departments that are down to 1 or 2 people. So you really don't have an option. I'm sorry, there it is. To take a look at that. I would be interested in knowing from council what you have an appetite for. Are you willing to think differently about, let's say, the way we handle recreation programming? It could be on that end of the spectrum. It could be on the other end of the spectrum. It could fleet maintenance. It could be, I don't think we can accomplish lawn mowing and other activities in a more cost-effective way than we are already. So I don't see that as an option. Are you open to changes in public safety?
And that's a question back to us, right?
Yes.
And, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
In terms of public safety, does that mean theoretically the major amount of money comes out of employee salaries and benefits? So in public safety, what we would be talking about would be not filling vacant positions or something along those lines. Would that
Possibly,
not
and
be
the,
right?
and what we would do our job in preparing is making sure that we articulate to the council what the service level changes are that are associated. Because at this point, any of the staffing changes are going to change the way we deliver service.
Right, I mean, you look at, anytime you reduce staff, you look at a reduced level of service. So, I mean, I think that's an option that comes to us. We could freeze positions, we can do a variety of different things, both in any of the departments. However, it seems that in most of them, that's not going to save us a lot of money. It would save us money in public safety possibly, but even with that, then there's a reduced service level on what people's expectations might be. And I think that I think while we may want to look at that, I'm not so sure that's the road we want to go down. I think fee structures, I think most of the people, and I can't speak for the rest of the council, I think fees go up. Our fees go up constantly for product and supplies and staffing and everything else. And so I think we might want to look at fee structures, but what that does is that impacts mainly the people that have less money out there in the community. And so I think we need to be aware of that as a council. Now, certainly we can take a look at our fee structures. There's no reason why we couldn't increase that. In terms of the TOT, we can increase that too in 2020 if it's put on an election cycle, if it's voted on by the public and that's increased. There's some possibility for fee increases there. You know, I think we're open to looking at all of this. I think it's just an option, and we have to look at what we think is best for the community and move forward from there. But I think everything's open for discussion, I think, at this point in time.
It looks like, go ahead.
Mr. Mayor, along that line, and I had mentioned it to Rosanna before, and possibly some of you, that maybe it's a good time to look at our MOUs, and specifically, I'm thinking about the Lions Center, because we've had some major expenses with the Lions Center and the use of the pool, without really singling anybody out, but I'm just, I mean, the high school doesn't have their own swimming pool, and they use ours, so maybe this would be a good opportunity to look at how much we're being paid, you know, for the use of the pool, and that's just an example, but that's one area that I think we might be able to increase fees and get some more income for our Parks and Rec.
Okay. And with respect to the shortfall, it's I mean, give or take, it's about 5%, right, of what we would need to make up 5% of the proposed budget of the general fund budget. So about the proposed budget's $15,320,000 as presented, right?
Yes.
Off your budget by department?
320,684.
And so the gap is about 700
46,845.
Yeah, so if you take 5%, yeah, it's about $760-some thousand. So it's about 5% if we were to make some reductions across the board. That may be an approach that we could look at, but it's still not necessarily the best approach. Is there any consideration, I know we've done it in the past, where we look at department by department to look to see what we can reduce?
Just so you're aware, I did do one-on-ones with every department. Rosa and I sat with every department, and there were line item reductions that were achieved in those conversations, as well as additions. The reductions are featured in this set of estimates, so we've already stripped
Voting on
and
down
not
that
added
road,
back
yeah?
in. Yes.
Yeah, and you're looking at 80% salaries and benefits and 20% that you can reduce. And if you get down below a 15% level on those other items, then you're almost painting yourself in a corner, and you cannot operate
We're already
under those
there,
types of
honestly.
conditions.
With reference to Parks and Rec in particular, the demands have been beyond our financial resources. The reason we had a budget adjustment today is because there are no dollars left in the approved budget.
And in my experience, even with smaller budget items or smaller budgeted departments, the more you get down below, say, a 10% level in something other than salaries and benefits, and it's practically impossible to operate without some form of subsidy into those little departments, because I've had to operate one before in that fashion. And so I'm kind of have some experience with that. And you can get down and below a 10% level in operational cost for rent and supplies and utilities and all that stuff, and then it becomes pretty much untenable. And you have to subsidize in some way. So.
I have one question.
Sure.
Regarding the revenue shortfall, it looks like by far the biggest shortfall is in the column of intergovernmental. What exactly is that? What all does that
Let me grab,
entail?
I don't have my,
Yes. Here you go.
yes.
Here, I have another copy. Here's, take that copy.
Yes. Rosa, if I could have you for a minute. Up here. Okay. When I look at intergovernmental, so it's your top page. I'm not sure I would agree that is our greatest revenue generator.
Which page?
It shows
Yeah, it's
us
only
intergovernmental.
$14,000.
Well, this one is what he's talking about.
Yeah,
She
no,
says
but
it's
he's
on the
saying
cover
it's our
sheet.
largest, it's not our largest.
Well,
I'm looking at
Page 61.
of the.
Oh, that's the audited financial statements. I need to, they're entered in different fashion than our
Uh-huh.
worksheets. So, can you tell me what the dollar value is? I can
It's
pull
saying
the
it's
audit.
short by 565,
Oh.
almost 566,000.
Right, I believe that is, there's a potential that that's tied to the Alastria Park. I think it's catch-up with the grant. We
Mm.
just haven't recognized
Okay,
the
okay.
revenues to offset.
So some of that money is grant money,
Yeah.
that's, okay.
Yeah. And the audit document, when it comes forward, we'll be happy to have the auditors here, have all your questions answered about that document. I'm not prepared to discuss it
Sure.
line by line.
Okay, thank you.
Uh-huh.
I know with respect to changes in fee structures, we have talked about it in the past, actually multiple times over the budget discussions. And the general sentiment, at least from various council members, has been that, it's always a difficult proposition, changing the fee structure for our user groups, whether that be at Parks and Rec or other, whether it's providing a fee for service delivery or for even the use of medical services. I mean, that's another thing where we
Yes.
haven't necessarily recaptured the cost, right? And so, although it's being done in other areas, I'm not sure if the community would necessarily support that sort of, expense. And so we've talked about those things. But considering that, are there any things that we could look at? The pool was mentioned, the user agreements, and we looked at that, 3 years ago, 4 years ago?
I think we're on year 4.
yeah.
We have 3 institutional arrangements. I'd refer to them that way generally. One is with Brawley Elementary School District, the second's with Brawley Union High School, the third is with Imperial Valley Desert Aquatics. We most recently updated the IVDA agreement, and I'm going to look to Parks and Rec. I believe our monthly charge is $500 per month
Okay.
because they use the pool year-round. I wish I had the number at the top of my head, but I believe, if I remember correctly and I don't misstate, we go through every single year, we provide an update in the MOU document to the stakeholder group of what it costs to run the pool. We don't count labor. We only count natural gas, the operational expenses outside of staff. And if memory serves me right, the figure is approximately $250 a day to operate the pool with no people. So, most of our equation is people.
Okay.
So what we were able to do is to obtain some form of offset when there had never been one before. It was not very warmly received because the service had been previously given for free. The way we worked it out with Brawley Union High School and the elementary school district is they pay a monthly amount for the months that they use the pool, when it's a majority of the days. So for Brawley Elementary School District, I'll have to dust off my MOU, but I want to say it's only 2 to 3 months out of the year that we receive payments for. And it's a modest amount, under 500 for certain. I need to pull the agreement. I'm sorry, I don't have it immediately at recall. The high school uses it for more months of the year because they use it for PE and some competitive swim. But the same amount that's charged to both districts, it's the same amount. The only difference is the number of months of their use. They're from the high school level. I think their reception to increased fees. They're both wonderful partners. Wonderful. They do a lot of projects with us to improve our park facilities that they use quite frequently. And I'm sure their argument would be that they invest in our properties already when they're not theirs.
I'm sure.
But I would be happy to broach that subject if council is willing to give me direction
Sure.
to look for cost recovery.
I think we need to look at everything,
Yeah.
but I think what we're kind of avoiding, I want to put out is we're probably needing to make some more significant decisions here
Yes.
tonight in terms of direction. And nobody wants to talk about reduction in force, no one wants to talk about, reduction in service level. So with that said, here's my question, and what I think needs to be explored. From the buckets that could be reduced, that would have the most significant impact. And you've mentioned, obviously, public safety. Everybody here in this room, it's not a question of fire protection and services versus law enforcement. Just looking at those buckets, we always have the staffing shortage. My question is, looking at these budget assumptions, where do we stand? We're always down a few bodies. How is that built into our budgeting? Are we assuming full staffing? That's what I always
We're
assume we do.
assuming
Yep.
the same number that is part of this fiscal year's budget.
Budget?
Yeah.
It's assumed, plus the police chief addition, plus the 5 months of the code enforcement officer. Those are the only changes from a body count point
That
of
was
view.
mentioned, and I think we're in agreement. We staying with those assumptions. I think that's important. But can we look at that without quite backfilling? I don't know if we're down 3 or 4 or 2, whatever. I know the number varies from one quarter to the next. Surely, maybe.
What-
In other words, consider the other positions that may not be filled to see if we can work without
Right.
them being filled, and see if that will offset some of that gap.
Would you want the vacancies to be driven by wherever they happen to occur, or by an appetite for particular departments reducing?
I started there, but I don't want to stop there. I know we have departments that are literally one-person, two-person departments. If you do anything there as far as
Right.
reduction in force, you don't have that
We don't have a
department. You can't do
department
that. I
anymore.
get that. So can we look across the agency as a whole and look at and come back with some offered solutions, which that would have, now, I want to add one other thing. We have some one-time monies tied up in these capital projects, as you mentioned, in the maintenance fund. I think there's a bit of a gamble there on our part, but yet important. And what we're gambling on is today's reality versus maybe tomorrow's, for example, the pool is a great example of something that's in dire need of that capital improvement. But nonetheless, as we're kind of moving from one year to the next or one season to the next, if we can keep doing that. So maybe taking some of our capital projects, reevaluating that.
Or a portion of those funds.
A portion as just a one-time gap. I know that's one-time money when you're looking at that, but that it maybe present, a little bit of an impact in this budget gap of 700,000 plus. But the more impactful moving forward is where we can look to reduce maybe some of those suggestions made to us. And would be my personal hope, is that, again, with these revenue projections going into 19, perhaps revenue projections going into 20, gas prices are up, maybe some of the
Increased fuel
SB1
sales,
money,
revenue,
population growth, there are additional houses, all these things. We're on the cusp of what we feel hopefully are a little bit more optimistic times, but I know that doesn't have immediate impact for this budget that we're talking about right now. So I think it's important, if we can find a reasonable way to move forward into this next budget, it's going to, anything we're talking about here is not pleasant. I know there's going to be some pain involved, but if we can do that and maintain a reasonable expectation of the services we provide, these core services I think are important. Because raising fees, that's great, but I would almost want to say, what's the impact?
Right,
You're talking
it's
about
very
a
insignificant.
few $1,000 here and there, quite honestly,
Yes.
and hurting. We need
Right. We have not been.
Big money.
We
Before
have-
that comment's made,
I'm sorry.
great,
Yeah.
great point
Yes.
with respect to, good way to look at it. And I would just add, addressing your comments and your question, I think it would be important for the council to look at, to see exactly, and we do see the vacancy report, but to see what dollar figure corresponds with that and the vacancy, and see if there's a justification for
Yes.
filling that position. I think it'd be very important for all of us to consider.
So, my question back to council is, and I do have tonight, I can actually recap for you our vacant positions and
Sure.
where we are in recruitments, because some of them
Are already out.
are
Uh-huh.
already out
Yeah.
the door and out the chute. So the question is your direction to freeze anything vacant that doesn't have an active offer out as a savings measure?
I wouldn't do that. I
Or-
would just
okay.
look
I
to
don't
see.
think that's-
So if I could, yeah,
It's
it won't take long.
possible, but I'm not sure that's the way we want to
Yeah.
go. I think
Right.
we want
So
to
this is-
evaluate each position on
Right,
its
but
own
this is the
merit.
downside of using the approach of vacancies, because they may
Right.
or may not be where you want
Correct.
them to go. So just
Sure,
real
but
quick.
that's
But
where the
that's the
justification
way it
would
is.
need to come into play.
Right.
So, for,
But maybe.
yeah, that's the other issue. Okay, so from a public works point of view, general fund is only part of the operations.
Right.
Sure.
Okay? So our engineering position was just vacated. We are in an active recruitment. 100% of the engineering expense is reimbursed
and
by
not
special
from general
funds.
fund. Right.
So we need that.
The other part of our operations and public works that are affected by the general fund is animal control. We only have one animal control officer. I would not recommend any changes on that front. We do have the area of fleet maintenance.
We're not looking at job positions.
Can we talk a little bit more about that one?
Yes, so for fleet maintenance, we are running a loss. I want to make sure I'm clear with the council that that is an area that I need to spend more time examining, along with the finance department, to understand it's underperforming from the point of view of charges. The way that particular cost center works, it falls under the maintenance fund, but the majority of charges are made to the general fund. So we would want to look at, if that were outsourced, what effect would that have on the general fund?
Yes, and I think you need to give
I
us a
think
figure
we need,
on
yeah,
that.
figures
Okay.
on that, for sure.
The library, we have 3 part-time positions that are vacant. One of them is, oh, they were filled, okay, well. Okay, so I have as notes as of this morning, one is pending a start date, that's a supervisory clerk. One is in backgrounds, and, so supervisory clerk, part-time, pending start date. Library aide, part-time, in backgrounds. Library page, part-time, pending start date. Which of the 3 of those was filled?
This today?
Yes. Page, okay. So Page is filled as of today. Okay. Parks and Recreation, we have no vacancies. PD, this one's a little bit more complicated. We have a vacant dispatcher pending medical clearance. We have a second vacant dispatcher in backgrounds. We have a vacant officer with a 5/8 start date. We have a police chief recruitment actively underway. We have a vacant detective slot pending medical clearance, and we have a vacant admin agent that is not yet addressed. So it's a vacant slot. I don't have anything.
And you
that's
don't
an
have
active
cost on
recruitment.
that, though.
Yes, I do have costs.
You do have
So
cost.
the only
Yes.
one that nothing's been done with is the
The vacant
administrative agent?
admin.
Right.
Okay.
And what's the cost on that?
Okay, give me 1 second.
Just to give
Do
you,
have
just
a
to give
note,
us a
just
rough
to give
idea
you-
of what that means.
If it's a PEPRA person,
Well,
okay, hang on 1 second. If it's a PEPRA individual, that number is 84,875, fully burdened.
But a big chunk.
Okay,
100,000.
okay. And then I'm gonna go on to fire. There are no vacancies.
Fire has none.
Finance, so finance is one of those other animals where there's parts of the cost of the individual carried by the utility, water and sewer end of the universe. Finance has an assistant finance director with a offer out in backgrounds. Development services, this is the new combined, planning and community development services. We have 1 vacancy that we're actively recruiting, which is the building inspector. And is that scheduled to close? Closed on Friday.
Okay,
So it's closed.
all right.
All right. Thank you.
So that's all I have from a
And
position.
that's all you have from a position point of
And
view?
with respect to outsourcing, I know you touched on it, but, some of the areas that we could outsource, are there anything?
There's potentially fleet maintenance.
maintenance
if the
department.
numbers
What's the
make
cost?
sense.
What's the
on-
cost of
I'd
that?
have to look at it further.
I think we need a recommendation from you on that one.
But
and-
that
and a
has the
cost
potential
breakdown.
of
Cost
offsetting
breakdown.
some of that gap, right?
Right, it would be hard for me to give it to you on the fly because of
Sure.
it being embedded in the maintenance fund. So we have to
Understood. Yeah.
untangle the funds that pay to sustain it.
Plus, you're looking at how much it costs to outsource and the
Exactly.
difference only. And
Correct.
so that can, that could be minimal or it could be major.
Right.
You just really don't know unless you've done a full analysis.
Yes.
Okay, all right.
But even if you outsource, you're still pulling from the general fund into.
Yes, you
Right.
are.
So
And
the
it-
way the charges work is, so you would take your whole fleet inventory and say, which of these vehicles are paid for by general fund for maintenance, the people who drive them, and which are the ones that are water or sewer related. So if you're water or sewer related, we're not really concerned with those charges as part of this discussion. We're interested in understanding how the fleet division, from a cost point of view, is it covering its expense for what it takes to run it? It's a six-figure sum to run that shop, and the charges coming in the door nowhere near offset the actual cost, and it's been that way for a number of years. That's why we chose, one of the reasons we chose not to move forward with backfilling the maintenance slot. We tried twice to recruit for, there used to be a fleet supervisor and two mechanics. One of our mechanics left the city. We attempted through 2 recruitment cycles to get somebody qualified in the door, did not work. We took a step back, looked at it and said, maybe this is a time, because so many of our vehicles from a PD point of view, those tend to be the vehicles that have the most miles on them because they've got a lot of road time. Our fleet has been had some life breathed back into it, which means they have fewer maintenance needs, which means the charges that were typically part of servicing haven't come to fruition. So the cost center is running at a loss. It's staffed with a solution that isn't offset by charges.
How many staff are there now?
2.
It would be 2.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, but I think
Okay.
valid points you brought up.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just, a couple others, built in obviously on all this are assumptions also with things, typical kind of perennial grants that we're used to. For example, I don't know what our Stone Garden take was for on the law enforcement side this year, but
We'll continue to turn over the rocks to see any ways that we can offset. We have to be careful with the guidelines for supplanting general fund and only work within the parameters of the eligible activities. So we're at the beginning stages of that. Rosa was kind enough to make phone calls this morning regarding, we also get a $100,000 per year from a state COPS grant that is administered by the County of Imperial. We have not factored in, we've got some costs that we know we're confronting for IVECA, Imperial Valley Emergency Communications Authority. We're a member to that JPA. We have annual contributions. We are trying to determine whether the $100,000 can be utilized to cover that membership fee this year. And then we also have a $22,000 figure. Remember the RCS upgrade, Regional Communication System upgrade project? So we're phasing in the 10-year financing terms using the facilities trust from IVECA to minimize the impact to local agencies. This year, we expect a payment. This coming fiscal year will be year 2 of the 10 years at $22,000. So we need to see if we can find a special law enforcement fund that can cover that expense for radios of public safety personnel.
Rosanna, if we could, I don't know if this is the appropriate time, but it's under the subject matter. Someone brought it up. I don't know if it was the mayor or someone brought up about on the fire side being medical responses, medical aid's a huge portion of what we do. I know the chief was pursuing and has been researching over the years about the possibility of some cost recovery and
Right.
putting actually, and we've kind of avoided that from the standpoint of, how does that, looking at our constituents, looking at the citizens, how do they look at, we're going to charge for something that we don't. But am I correct or incorrect? And a good portion of that is you're collecting from insurance. It gets into the medical billing reimbursement business. So you're collecting from commercial insurance, Medicare, Medi-Cal. There's also federal matching dollars, I believe, if you do have a fee structure. But Chief, could you just give an overview of that possibility?
Sure. Honorable Mayor, Council members, Chuck Braza, Fire Chief. Yeah, there's a big component on that you drive it towards the insurance company, and that's how you get reimbursed. And when you go after cost recovery, you can go after everything and anything underneath the umbrella for what we provide as a service. It just does not have to be medical. It could be a vehicle accident, hazmat, investigations, everything. So, but yeah, there's a lot of it that is driven back from the insurance companies.
Right. And the concern is ultimately that the patient or the user of the service is getting billed, but
gonna be
it's really
liable.
through their insurance and whatever may be in place. In some cases, they may not have insurance, I understand that. So there is a potential self-paid component to it, but
Yes.
there could be a pretty significant pot of funds we're not realizing, just the fact that we don't charge, we don't have a cost recovery. So this isn't charging a couple extra bucks for a typical service. You guys, this is, how many medical aid responses do we have a year?
We have a bunch.
Oh,
How many thousand? I mean,
we're running over 2,500.
okay, so that's 2,500 responses that could have a bill associated with it, of which, let's say you use a modest number of 25% of that, you actually collect something, of which a large sizable amount, depending on the mix, comes from, like I said, Medicare, and other insurance products. So, it could, what I would ask maybe in this vein, that's not today's solution, but could we explore that?
We'd be
Yes.
happy to
A
bring
little
it
bit
back
more.
to you. I think we last had it before the utility user tax renewal was sought, and there was some sensitivity to the timing
Yeah,
of it.
there was.
I think there's cities, some much larger cities that are
That do
collecting significant
Very
amounts of
significant
revenue off
Well,
of
I'll
that.
let you know,
Yeah.
besides the city of Westmoreland, we are not the only city
Right.
charging for our
Right,
services.
right.
Calpat and Hopewell do.
I also believe that it depends upon your aggressiveness in terms of receiving that money.
Sure.
If there is an insurance company A and you want to be aggressive, or you don't have to necessarily be aggressive. I think it depends upon the client base and what you're really looking at. But I do think we're missing out maybe on a substantial amount of money there. And I don't mean it's going to pull us out of 600,000, but I mean, we might recover 100,000, we might recover more than that.
Maybe
I mean,
much
depending
larger.
upon what we
And it
what we
also
get.
depends on exactly what you want to go
Right,
after for cost
exactly.
recovery.
Right.
If you just want
Yeah.
to get the cost recovery for the supplies you used on a call,
Yeah.
Right.
then you can do that.
That's
Or
lesser.
you can, they at a much higher
What's
rate.
our standard response? I'm sorry, Mr. I was just going to ask on a typical medical aid, who does respond from our department? Do we send an engine company, or is it
Yeah,
just typically?
usually you're at the station one or both of them.
What's your volume there? See if it's-
So it's the engine company, and so you have 4 personnel on one engine, and out of station 2 you have 3.
They have a lot of costs.
And I know we've discussed it, like I said in the past, and it really is dependent on the agency who's responsible for billing too. I mean, they're obviously getting paid as well, so I don't know how aggressive it would be with respect to collections and those sorts of things. So it would be something we need to discuss and see how aggressive we would be in our collection
What our
method
policy
too,
might
and our policy would be. But I think that's a great point. We've talked about it before, and there could be, off the top of your head, I don't know, I know you've done the homework in the past, but is there any estimate as far as what could be recovered on a yearly basis? It can range, right?
In my head, but I think when we did look into it, we just looked at the medical portion, excluding fires and other kind of types
Right.
of calls. And I want to say maybe it was like a small figure, maybe $30,000 to $40,000, and that was mainly going after for supply recovery. We didn't take into effect of like fully burden rate of the personnel, fuel, wear.
But
and
it
tear
could
on
go
engine.
up.
It could. Oh yeah, it could definitely go up.
Yeah.
Or something to consider.
So, Chief, did you say the other cities do not have cost recovery, or they do?
They do. All cities here in Pearl County do, except for City of Westmoreland and Brawley.
I have one quick question on that. Does that require a 218 procedure, or that's just something that, as a council, we can decide?
No, it doesn't require that. It's just a billed service. I mean,
I think we should.
Because it's not a profitable venture. It's literally
It's
it's
cost
cost
recovery,
recovery.
right,
Yeah,
yeah.
it falls under fee.
thank you.
Question for Rosanna, I think. Are there any other areas of outsourcing of services that you see we would look at this year?
As I mentioned to council in the staffing outlook, I didn't see a lot of enthusiasm, but want to make sure that I ask in a public meeting, because I've only received individual feedback outside of the meeting structure. A lot of agencies do, thank you very much, look to the potential outsourcing of fire or PD. I raised this subject as we were readying to recruit, to determine whether or not there was appetite. As individuals, I did not see enthusiasm from individual council members, and if I've misread the collective, certainly happy to examine those alternatives if that's something there's an appetite for.
I'm not sure if there's an appetite on the
Not for
council.
that,
I mean, I don't know if the gap that's presented here is something that we can't necessarily overcome, just looking at things closely. So I'm not sure if,
And Ms. Ray, I think getting a chief in place is critically important because if nothing else, it's giving us the bandwidth within a very important department, obviously a big, important, almost non-negotiable piece to the service that we provide. But also what's critical about that, there's a lot of there's some revenues and whatnot and grants and opportunities that could be realized there if we can just kind of build in and give our interim chief and our command staff there just, again,
Sure.
a little bit more bandwidth to do that. And most important is doing what they do every day. So what I would just still emphasize, it's not picking on a department. It's looking where we can. If there's, I think our appetite's always been to just not hire someone that's not been hired. That's better than reduction in force,
Sure,
but
yes.
in a manner of speaking, still reduction in force.
Right.
But if we can hold, and we've used that strategy in the past and it has gotten us through.
we're using it now.
We're using it now, exactly. And so it's coming back to us with what those solutions can look like and how we can close those gaps. And then seeing where we're at and seeing what that looks like. And it's still up to us whether we want to go that path or not.
Yes.
But I think right now, I rather than, kind of taking a roundabout step, we need to be a little bit bolder and really just look at what's it going to take. So I would still urge us to look at some of the capital projects, because that
Do you
also
mind
goes.
if I could just ask or comment in one way so you have this piece of information? We have ready to go an action item on the breathing apparatus replacement project. It's a piggyback provision on an existing contract that the equipment that we have is antiquated. We have attempted to obtain outside grant assistance with no success.
Right.
I have Chief knocking at my door saying, can we bring this forward? Because I'm concerned about the equipment that our personnel are using and whether or not it's adequate under the circumstances. So there's that piece.
So to me, if I was weighing that versus the pool repair, I would go with that.
Right, and with the pool repair, just full disclosure, we're at risk at
I
any time of being shut down.
We understood.
Okay.
And so, but that's what I meant by that may be the risk we have to take. But again, if it comes down to addressing that, unfortunately crossing that bridge when we come to it, and hope that.
And the 500,000 would be reduced by the design expense that we have incurred already for those documents.
Right.
I don't remember the figure off the top of my head. It's less than
Are
100,000.
there others, though?
I'd like to take a look at
Go ahead.
that,
Yeah.
but if I'm weighing the pool shutdown versus a life of a fireman, I'm certainly going to go with the breathing apparatus for the firemen, simply because that, I believe, is a more critical need. Certainly, we want to keep the pool open, and we'll do everything we can to do that.
Yeah.
I think, though, from my viewpoint here and what we're talking about here, though, I think we want you to do a couple different things. I think everybody on the
Options.
council wants some
Okay.
things and some direction. So if we could maybe recap some of that and maybe
Yeah.
give her some specific direction as to
In-
what we want her to do.
Good point. And the recap, I think, if we're all in agreement, would be looking to see what positions, even though I know you listed them, but to see what positions, and you mentioned one that was fully burdened, administrative agent over at PD, but look to see what positions could be held off even for some time.
Got it.
And that might be one position that we could hold off on for a while here.
Right, and it
see-
doesn't have to
and
be the
see how
full
that
year, right,
works.
so-
Maybe the other ones we fill, But as we know, we have turnover within the police department on
Right.
an ongoing basis. So as we revisit those positions and the refilling of them, I think we would have to do an analysis as to how that impacts service levels and whether we're willing to take that
And
risk
quite
or not.
honestly, even if you named it as a going forward basis as of July 1, 2018, we know we're going to experience attrition. It would just, I
Right.
would need the policy directive to, we could staff up today knowing that it's,
But I wouldn't touch
Understood.
the dispatchers.
No, I think
well,
you
I don't
can't.
think
I
we
can't even
can,
fill it.
because if you look at our
I mean,
cost
you have to-
overruns
yeah.
from
Yeah, we
a
can't-
overtime
Yeah, we
point
have
of
to-
view,
we
we're not
have
able
to-
to staff.
we
a
have
I want to make that
model.
clear, yeah,
Yeah.
we're just
Let-
looking at.
Everything's up for consideration, but we also, we're looking for your recommendation to see what's a vital resource here and something that we're gonna need.
Okay.
The other item, go ahead.
I just wanted to also to mention, if we do have any other vacancies that we don't have, because you gave us the ones we have right now.
Right.
But let's say another vacancy comes up in the near future, somebody decides to retire from a department, instead of automatically going through the process of starting to backfill that position to talk to us about.
Absolutely.
We've done that before.
So,
Yeah.
and the personnel summary is the method that we use. We can commit
You
to
have been
not
giving us that
actually initiate a recruitment until it makes its way through a public
Council meeting,
All right.
sure.
That might be.
The other avenue is outsourcing to see what other areas we could
Yes,
look
we
to see if
wanna-
we can outsource, whether that's fleet maintenance or another department.
But we need to see amounts, or we need to see at least
An
projected
analysis
amounts,
of
an
it.
analysis of
Correct.
that, to make sure that that's worth it. Because we lose a certain amount of control by doing that.
We do.
I'm willing to make that move in the budget. However, I also want to look at that. I think sometimes we lose control and the service isn't delivered in quite the same way as it was before, and I think we have to look at that.
Mm-hmm.
And say we outsource that, but we have to drive our vehicles to El Centro every day to get them serviced. There's going to be some give and take there, and I think we have to analyze that very closely.
There was an earlier question with reference to the utility user tax projection
Oh, for,
increases.
when
So
we'll be-
Shirley was able to find my notebook
Okay.
from last year. So the 17-18 estimate was figured at $3,468 of additional utility user tax based on their planned consumption.
Okay,
Okay, thank you.
But are they looking at ramping up considerably?
they are.
When well, we're not sure if we will be their final solution. As stated, we won't be, so the wastewater funds would not, the basis for the UUT
Right.
wouldn't be there. So
Okay.
it's up in the air. They're going to have the option to use us if they want us, but if they want to use Biofiltro, they'll have the ability to construct that solution and use that alternative.
I think we also want you to look overall at fee schedules. If there are increases that you're going to recommend to us, I think we need to get those as soon as possible, and then we'll talk about fee increases, maybe after the summer, maybe during the summertime. And
Look
then
for rollout
we're going to have
next
to look
year,
at
possibly.
cost of splash pad and cost of pool, and I think we need to analyze those things. I don't think we're going to say don't open them, but I think we may have some limitations on our ability to fund them on a full day or whatever we're talking about.
One
So-
thing council might be interested in, I don't know if it's low-hanging fruit or not, but it's something I want to make sure you're aware of, our facilities use policy for Parks and Rec activities. We have on the books charges
Yeah.
that we do not impose.
Yeah.
So for instance, every single road closure has I believe it's a $500 minimum fee. We don't charge it, and I assure you, we cost more than that in terms of what
Sure.
we pay out to employees and equipment rates.
Okay.
All right.
So
So
look at all
that's
of that. I
something-
mean,
the other-
I think that's just a look at everything.
So those are the items that we're considering, right? Is there
The other
anything
thing-
else?
Well, the only thing is, I didn't know, did we go ahead and give direction to our fire chief to pursue that cost recovery, or do we want to do that?
We'll dust
We-
off
we
our
can
last
dust it off, yeah.
presentation. Chief did come to you, I believe.
Yes, he did.
2 years ago.
But we'd be happy to restart the conversation and at least send you the PowerPoint that was part of that prior, and then take it from there based on feedback.
Are there any other items that?
The only other point I'd like to make is I think we also will have to look at our reserve and the amount.
Sure.
And we're going to have
That's a
to
good point.
consider that as a council, and we're going to have to look at what are we comfortable with? And because I think we're going to have to probably draw some from reserves as we do last year. And I think that's probably going to happen if we can minimize that as much as possible. And I think the council, we set the reserve level of 15%. We dropped it to 13%. If we need to drop it again, we may be in agreement on that, we may not be, but I think it's something that we have to look at from a reserve standpoint. Certainly, once we get below a certain level, that could be problematic.
Sure.
But I do think that each year we draw some from that reserve, and I think we're gonna, 90-some-odd thousand we were talking about this year. I think in your presentation, there was 90-some-odd.
We don't always draw from it,
thousand, but
so-
we don't always draw from it. But I think we have to look at the reserve, but understanding that there is a reserve and that.
Those
if
are
it's
our
needed,
draws
we-
out of the general fund reserve.
And if
Right.
we need it, I think we're willing as a council, and I can't speak for everyone, we're willing to make that decision, and I think
That's
we're
what's-
willing to do that.
But we do need to look at that really at the final stage, you
Right.
know, just to see how things are moving forward, and, you know, we'll, if there is a change in policy that needs to be made, we can make it at that time. If not, you know.
And-
The other
Mayor,
item, go ahead.
The only other one is that, the one I mentioned, and, about the MOUs, to look at the MOUs with
Right,
the high
right,
school to
right.
see if there's, opportunity there to increase the amount that they reimburse us.
Valid point. The other item on, for consideration is other contributions. We've traditionally met these obligations, at least for the past several years, including California League of Cities, Southern California Association of Governments, California Association for Local Economic Development, Chamber of Commerce, IVDC, Imperial Valley Film Commission, and International Council of Shopping Centers. Now, considering the request from the Chamber of Commerce, I did want to at least touch on this topic. Is there any discussion that the council would like to have at this time, or any consideration for the request?
I've said it before, but especially based on the event that was held Saturday evening, I was impressed by the turnout and by the community spirit that was there. Certainly if that's the kind of activity that the chamber does on a somewhat regular basis, I think there's value in that, and potentially a return on investment, which I think is what Katie Luna brought forth at her presentation. And I would be for looking at giving them some of the TOT, just based on that event. That was very impressive.
But what would your suggestion be, considering we do have a deficit of about $750,000? What would, if you were considering some sort of proposed dollar figure, what would that be?
And that's the $1 million question, because when you're in a budgetary shortfall, you're always looking for ways to cut. I guess sometimes you have to spend money to make money. And on a personal level, I try not to do that. I try to just spend what I have when I have it. But if there's potential for return on investment through, more people coming and visiting and staying in the hotels, and through additional sales tax revenues that are generated from events like that, I would guess that surrounding businesses probably saw a surge of sales on Saturday evening that you can't tie to the TOT, but certainly there's revenue generated for the city from that sales tax. I would be willing to look at throwing maybe 30% of the TOT toward the Chamber of Commerce.
That would be an
On-
additional approximately $100,000.
Right.
Out of the budget, out of the general fund budget, so.
Right, but again, if there's the potential that and more is brought back in, that's what I would call a return on investment. And again, if it's a trial period where we can see if that's actually what happens, I just think it would be worth the try.
Very well. Are there any other comments from council? Any suggestions?
I would just like to also suggest that, I feel that the Chamber of Commerce does bring in a lot of business to our community, to the city. And in the presentation, Katie talked about the tourism and the opportunity to bring more tourists, draw them to either to the sand dunes and the Salton Sea, and she had other ideas about bringing some more people out here to our city of Brawley. And a perfect I'm I would be in support of increasing the amount that we support the chamber with. I don't, I'm not inclined to go as high as that, as the recommendation of our co-counsel, Hamby. I'd be willing to increase the $10,000 contribution to a higher amount. I would say maybe increase it to 20,000 and, for consideration and see how that goes. I know that's not a, big substantial amount, but
Well, it's
based on
doubling.
our,
Yeah, it's
but based on
100%.
our budgetary situation right now, that I'd be willing to consider increasing that
Yeah.
donation
Any other comments
or
from
contribution.
City
I
Council?
should say.
I'm definitely inclined, well, first off, I wanted to hear this presentation, and that's, I think, what I said a couple weeks ago. We need to get into the budget process, and we need to know where we stand. So I find it a little bit difficult, looking at these numbers, to want to offer up $100,000, I think is, I think anybody in this room would understand that. Now, I also understand return on investment as well, but the chamber partnership is just, I've already stated, has been a very positive thing, and this isn't the only event that we filled Main Street and our roads with. We've been doing that since we opened up Main Street, since relinquishment, and since we brought many of our events back downtown. Not every event's exactly the same, but I think we've had many successful events with our partnership, and bearing in mind the city's a partner in that as well. So with all that said, it's not a matter of want, it's a matter of practicality here. Right now, we're talking about cops, fire, apparatus, pools, and et cetera. And the notion of getting an ROI from tourism that's going to be that impactful within the next 6 months or a year or the next budget cycle, I need more information on that before I'm convinced of that. But I am in full favor of, as I said before, I think we need to do what we can for an increase, and I'm a little bit more in line with Councilmember Jauregui, and I'm also in line with exploration at a future time down the road with more information on what we could do with TOT tax in the future, whether it is a ballot initiative, we look to increase it and have a nexus with that revenue and tie it somehow to the chamber. I've stated this to Katie, and I didn't get any follow-up. I don't know if we haven't had time, and I hope we can, do that, whether it's one-to-one or here, in the public process. But I stated very clearly that this is something with time, if we can put the proper time and research into, that we can do this. But I thought it was a little quick last meeting. It's been a few weeks, and to me, I wanted to hear this presentation. This presentation today doesn't convince me that we need to move forward with 30% of our TOT tax. So I'm a little bit more in line with Councilmember Jauregui of doing what we can to bump it and continue our partnership. And I'd love to hear from, if there's a different point of view hearing now our budget process too.
Very well. Comments?
Well, I've always been supportive of the chamber, as I have indicated many times in the past. Looking at this budget, I'm not in favor of 30% of the TOT. I would lean towards Councilmember Kastner Jauregui's recommendation, and we'll make it work some way or another. I think we need additional research on what we might want to do for the chamber in the future. I also think that we could do a ballot measure for the TOT tax, where that we do some revenue sharing in that area with any kind of increase that we see in that. I also think there has to be, when we go with a large portion of money, there has to be some kind of follow-up, and there has to be some kind of return on investment. Sure. And so I think we'd be looking at what if we're going up or we're going down in terms of tax revenue. We'd have to look at what the percentages are and how they shake out over the course of several different years. But I think this is a longer process than what we have now. And looking at this budget, especially since this money comes from the general fund, if it came from another resource, I certainly would feel more comfortable with it. But at this point in time, I think that's kind of where I stand on this issue.
All right, good point. And I would agree. I mean, I certainly value what the chamber does and the work that they do and the events they've put on. I know I've volunteered many years with the chamber themselves, and I've put in a lot of effort, and I certainly appreciate all the work that takes place. I mean, it's hard work. It's certainly not easy. But at first, I'd like to get through the general fund process. I do think that I'm much more inclined to support something much more modest, but I do want to make sure that we're covering our bases with respect to public safety, fire protection, all the other funds that we have to make sure that we cover, and right now we're looking at about a $750,000 gap. There has been some direction to our city staff to see if we can maybe look at some alternatives to help reduce that number, but I still think that we're going to be short of that. So I would be inclined to help support the chamber further, but at this time, it's still too early to tell exactly where we'll land. I've stated it before, my position would be a little bit more modest, certainly, than the $100,000 or 30% proposal. But I do think that there's an opportunity to increase it, even with our shortcomings. So I value what the chamber does. I really want to make sure that they're successful, and I know we're going to continue to support the chamber in every capacity that we can. So, but I certainly would like to look at the budget and what we've proposed today, coming back with some of the items that we've requested with respect to, some of the items that we could consider outsourcing, some of the service level changes and other things that we can consider before we make any final decision. So these are things that we're just discussing as a general fund workshop, and it's not going to be finalized today, certainly, so.
I don't know if council's at the point of wanting to receive any community input today.
Sure.
And then want to also offer that it would be helpful for us to talk a little bit about schedule and next steps.
Sure.
And would be happy to wrap that up.
Let me
with
open
you
it up for
when-
public comment with respect to any item that we've discussed in our budget process. If anybody from the public would like to come up and make a statement or has a comment or a question for the city council or city staff, please come up.
Good evening, Katie Luna, Brawley
Katie.
Chamber of Commerce. I just want to thank you all for your consideration for our proposal. We definitely appreciate that. And just to keep in mind as you guys continue the conversation further down the line that we did propose services. So while we're appreciative of the additional funds, we do want to have objectives and contracts lined up behind it because we do believe that good business has solid, measurable goals and outcomes that are tied to it. And thank you for coming to the Taco Showdown. It was a great time. George, great job on
Thank you.
the wrestling.
It was fun. It was a lot of fun. I'll tell you, it was a lot of fun.
Get
A
out
lot of
there.
people out
So,
there. Yeah.
thank you guys.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who'd like to make a comment? No? All right. All right, well, thank you. There is a comment. There is another public comment.
Okay.
I thought everybody was rushing to.
Okay, they were.
No, I don't think so. They weren't rushing
Knock
to
you
speak.
down, huh?
Honorable Mayor and council members, I'm Mike Morales, Teamster representative. From hearing the discussion, I just wanted to, being a representative of the employees of the city of Brawley and Imperial as well, but I wanted to just make a little informative comment, and that is on, even though the fleet department is not a generating department that doesn't generate revenue, it's a supportive function of the city. Keep in mind that you're speaking of one gentleman's employment possibly, if you chose to go to the route of subcontracting, but also with them doing the maintenance of your fire engines and so forth. One of the things, and him being certified to work on these apparatuses and the fire engine, if you outsource it, the closest place to take those is up the hill. So now you're gonna be without an engine for a period of time. And that's one of the things I wanted you to consider, because there's no one here in the valley close by that can work on engines, fire engines. Okay, so I just wanted to make that known fact.
I appreciate the comment.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
With respect to that, Chief, is there someone locally that can do the work? That could,
Yeah, we haven't really explored that because this topic is just kind of surfacing.
Sure.
I know when there has been some difficulties with one of our engines, they end up turning around and outsourcing it to the actual vendor that made the engine itself.
See.
For instance, Pierce, South Coast, and Ontario.
very well.
Yes, Ontario. Uh-huh. And there's also another outfit in San Diego that we have not used before, but I know San Diego Fire uses them. As far as here locally, we used to use Dion, Pete, or Sanchez, our mechanic. He had sent our engine there a few different times, mainly for a diesel component that he wasn't able to tackle and get a quick turnaround. From my understanding, is Dion's out of business now, and they've been taken over by another company, so we really haven't explored that avenue just yet. I know the Imperial County Fire, they have their own mechanics, but they're struggling. They have something like 26 engines or something like that, so they're way behind the 8 ball on their maintenance. I spoke to Calexico as well. They have recently gone to a company, I believe it's Rick's Diesel. It's somewhere there in El Centro. I don't know what the results have been on that, and as far as El Centro, I do not know.
And if we could consider that as part of the exploration process, I think that would be very important as well.
I think that's what we're looking at. Yeah, I think we haven't made any decisions,
Yeah.
and I think we're going to look to the city staff to provide us with some of those alternatives and what they see in terms of cost savings overall
Right.
in that,
Yeah.
in that
And
scenario.
But thank you very much for the information for the I understand. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Reyes?
As a person who uses sometimes to shut down the streets, that $500 fee is very appropriate. We'd be more than glad to pay it. Much more than that be difficult when they're fundraisers. And I would think the council also should deal with it on a, per case basis, depending on what the issue is. But like my event would gladly pay that $500. It's more appropriate as a partner that we want to be with the city. And there's other ways to make those fees in other places as well. Very, very good. The budget workshop was very good, and I hope there's a lot more information coming forward, right?
Thank you, Mr. Reyes. Is there anyone else who'd like to make a public comment?
Go ahead, Liz.
Good evening. My name is Liz Gonzalez,
Gonzalez,
owner of Heart Insurance Center. Thank you, Honorable Mayor, for letting me say a few words. I've been a past president of the Chamber of Commerce and have worked, I'm finishing off my 6th year working. As a community member and as a business owner, I sincerely appreciate that you are considering that $20,000. It's difficult, and as we said in our meeting today, we're starting to rely on beer sales for the success of our program, and that is not the way it should be. Our business member community is dwindling, unfortunately. The big boxes, the Starbucks, they don't join the chamber. So the support from you as a city council to our chamber is very, very important, and I appreciate it very much.
I appreciate your comments, Ms. Gonzalez, very much. I truly appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Is there anyone else from the public who'd like to make a comment?
So I want to thank the council and our attendees tonight for great input. We will try our best to continue the research effort to get some alternatives before you in the future. In terms of next steps, my question to council is there an appetite for standalone meetings to be the next conversation, or for it to be an appendage to an existing scheduled?
I think if we could add it, since we've already gone through this process, and this is the lengthier process, we have defined a much more narrow scope. I think if we can add it to a meeting, I think it would be more appropriate, and it keeps everybody in line with the normal meeting process as well. So unless there's another recommendation.
If we do have to have a special one, we can
We
call
can,
for a
but-
special one. But
I think
And
at
is
this time-
council open just in the spirit of making sure our community is aware of when the general fund is next scheduled? We can do maybe some additional outreach.
Sure.
Since
That's
it's not a standalone, where they know that it's
That's
part of the, well,
probably
maybe
a
we put it
decent-
at the front end.
Sure.
That's a decent
Before
deal. Yeah,
other
we could do that
items.
first too, rather than regular business,
Sure.
and that way we
Put
get
it
that
at
out of the way.
And the
first.
normal meeting immediately to follow.
Right.
Yeah.
That way,
Sure.
people that are
We're
here
meeting
just
next
for that
week.
can
Thank
leave
you.
and go
For general
home.
fund,
and
but We're meeting next week, so, the other thing we could do, just as an idea, this could be a progressive conversation as it is, because I think we all learned a lot. so
A
now
general
we-
fund update at the tail
Right,
end of the
at
next
very
meeting?
next meeting, so
Yes.
that.
If
Next
there's
week's
anything to
next
update.
Tuesday.
I understand.
No, no,
But if there's
no.
even anything to grab.
But we may have more.
Meeting's next
or-
Tuesday.
or this.
Yeah.
Hold on, time out. Let us further
Sorry.
define.
So what's the first?
No, an
about the
opportunity for
15th?
us to come back. We might have some more ideas, is all I'm saying.
I think
We'll
we-
create a placeholder for
Yeah.
a
And
continuing.
and it
think
could just
that's
be a simple, hey, we're working on this,
Yes.
don't get wrapped up in the Rosanna-style
Yeah.
report of like, 40
That was
pages,
cold.
No details
Yeah,
then?
yeah, no, just,
Yeah, no details.
sometimes it's just
That's it.
quick and easy,
No
So,
details. Yep.
is there any other comments from council? All
Not
right.
at this time.
Well, we'll move on. Thank you very much, Rosanna and staff. Thank you very much. We're going to move on to city council member reports. Let's try to keep them brief. And if we could move on with council member Hamby.
Yeah, not much to report. I went to the Taco Showdown. It was a great event. Enjoyed it. Enjoyed seeing a few of my fellow council members there. Pretty much everybody, I think, was there.
But so who are the few that you enjoyed seeing? You said
Well,
a few.
I mean, there was
It actually was me, right? It was
right.
actually
Definitely
me that
Sam.
you
I enjoyed
enjoyed.
seeing Sam.
I know.
All right.
I didn't see you. I did not. I know you were there, but I didn't see you. And fielded a couple of calls and complaints from community members. One had to do with one community member sees a fire truck coming into his neighborhood every so often and stopping in front of a house. So he says that they're using fire trucks for personal use. And I spoke with Chief Peraza,
on call.
and he said when you're on duty,
Yeah.
you have to be ready to go at any moment. And so I'm passing that word along to this community member who's concerned about that. But I definitely appreciate our fire department and the fact that they have to be ready at all times. So that's my report.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Kestner Howdy?
Well, I feel like we just had a meeting, right?
Yeah, we
last
did.
week. I did attend on the 19th, on last Thursday, I did attend the IBC Hall of Fame induction of President Victor Jaime, who's getting ready to retire. And then they also had the induction of Dr. Roach, and his wife was there to accept along with Dr. Goki. They did a real nice presentation about Dr. Roach. And beautiful event. I even got to see the name of the robot is Pepper. They have a new robot, or I guess their first robot at Pure Valley College, and had a conversation with the audience and everything, so it was really interesting. So this artificial intelligence is taking over, that's for sure. And then I also attended the Great Taco Showdown, and I guess there was so many people there that I didn't see a lot of you, but I understand you were there. So anyway, the only one that I actually talked to was George. And then I found myself a good spot where I could see everything and see the competition, and took a lot of pictures and videos of the taco eating contest and stuff. And so it was really, really a great entertainment. It was good.
All right.
That's my report. Thank you.
Councilmember
And
Ketchman?
the reason why they left early is they go to bed with the chickens, just teasing. Okay?
No, I had
But
a-
I stayed out
I
very
had a
late.
grand-
at the event.
Unfortunately, I had a grandkid that I had to go
There you
home.
go. That's it.
That's why I didn't go to Inferno.
My grandkids came early, and then they left by the time I got there, so that's what happened with me. No, I went to the Taco Showdown and hung out quite a bit at Inferno along with that, and they said that George was there refereeing, and they tried to get me to referee, and I said no.
No, he was wrestling. But you know what happened? He was
You were
wearing,
wrestling?
You were wrestling.
Oh, I thought you were
But
wrestling.
Sam had a mask
My
on, but then
mistake.
the glasses gave him away. He was wearing-
George didn't need a mask, but that's okay. That's all right. I mean, if that's the way it is, that's just the way it is.
I gotta
I'm
get.
sorry.
I gotta give you-
Oh, yeah, thanks.
I'll give you
Okay,
credit
yeah.
there.
Okay, and so I hung out a lot at Inferno with Luke. We hung out there for quite a few hours. We discussed city business with people as they would come in, and so we had quite a few discussions there. You had a question?
No, I
question?
was going to say the evidence was on somebody taped
Yes,
you
somebody
there.
had a
Well,
tape of us.
yeah.
They taped us.
How many-
In there? It was horrible.
How long were your conversations?
They
Was
were
it
long.
3 or 4 beers?
Oh, they were long.
Yeah?
Oh, they were
More than that?
I only drank one beer. No.
Okay.
You know
Real
me.
slow.
Okay. I went to the Pioneers Annual Dinner. Pretty great event. I had opted to go there. I kind of committed myself to go there. I had worked on some of their items for the auction, and we had a real good time, and they made money, I'm sure, and and they were very thankful. And their event was really, really nice. There were so many events going on around everywhere. I also did the Rotary Spring Social. We did that at Chabella's, and we about froze to death because it was when the wind came up that night, and it got really cold and it was outside. So that, but we all got there. We all got our food. It was a really nice event. And then I also did a history of Brawley presentation to the Brawley Christian Academy students. I think there are 5 that are in the 6th grade at Brawley Christian Academy, and they came in here and I showed them pictures of Brawley and talked to them about old time Brawley and showed them some pictures,
Personal history,
some
yeah.
letters from the Letterman's jackets from the 1930s and 40s from the Brawley and the Brawley Junior College, when there was a Brawley Junior College. And so that was a nice event, and I think they appreciated that. And it's interesting to teach the kids about the history of Brawley because it has changed over 110 years, and it continues to evolve and change as we speak out there. So, but that's my report.
Thank you very much. Was that your Letterman's jacket?
Huh?
Was that your Letterman's jacket?
Yeah. It'd be nice.
Mayor Pro Tem
Mr.
Wharton?
Mayor, Taco Showdown, Spring Social, everything that everyone already covered. Fielded a few calls. I want to thank staff for addressing an issue off of G and on some unpermitted, maybe vehicle storage sales, something.
Oh, yes.
of sorts.
Still
Agency,
working
yes,
to
they're
resolve.
working
on
With
it.
a notice for delivery, hopefully
They're
resolved
working on
by
that.
next Monday.
Super.
That is our,
But
yes.
the response was extremely quick, so I know it was appreciated by the reporting party, so I appreciate that. And then have a meeting actually coming up with Councilmember Hamby, reference some interest again in the airport, so the airport interest continues. That's tomorrow.
And we have to meet again, too.
And we have to meet again too, as
Yes,
I
for
was
the
just
ad hoc
reminded.
committee.
So,
Oh, yes,
yeah,
ad hoc.
that'll take place this week, so there'll be quite a bit going on this week
Plus
moving
Friday.
forward. And as well as I fielded a few other discussions around, again, interest in the airport as far as where it's going. So, and I do plan to get with you and brief up. So, Mr. Mayor,
Thank you.
that's it.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, everyone, for having the patience in tonight's discussion. I know sometimes it gets a little long, and it's, budget discussion is not always the most fun to discuss, especially when we're talking about potential of not having some positions, filled. But at any rate, thank you all very much for your help. I did attend the Assemblymember Eduardo Garcia. He did have a 2018 Women of the Year presentation over at Las Chavelas Restaurant, and he awarded several women recognition for their leadership and service throughout Imperial County. And so that was great to be at, and I think he's a great representative for us here. I mean, I made the comment, and I've made the comment to him before, is that he doesn't necessarily need to be in Brawley. He represents 500,000 people. So it's, it's always great to see him out here and helping, and recognizing people in our community. And some women from Brawley were recognized, so I'm happy to see that as well. Yeah. So, no, fantastic. But, and it's great for a local business as well. So all those things are positive things. So I was happy to be able to represent the city of Brawley there at that event. Also attended the IVC Hall of Fame induction of Victor Jaime, and I also met Pepper. She was, in the bar afterwards, and she'd been turned off already, and I asked him to turn her back on so we could take a selfie, and so I took a selfie with Pepper at the bar. And so, she was good.
The robot.
But
What is the robot?
the
I have a
robot says,
picture. I think I have a
hello,
picture.
it doesn't say, I don't know yet.
It's
I don't know.
programming? Is that what they're teaching?
Yeah, but they were, from my understanding, they're going from like the Amazon Alexa model to the Google model. And I'm like, I don't want her anywhere around me, you know what I mean? So it's like, but.
It seems kind of odd, doesn't
It's
it?
an odd
Like, she
thing.
just talk.
She should be more
and she
realistic
moves-
in her.
She moves
yeah.
her arms and everything.
Yeah. It's like, yeah. I mean, I was being silly with a robot, but anyhow, it's a different story. Anyway, one other item, I did attend, obviously, the event this weekend. I think it was a great event, well-attended, a lot of community participation. The weather cooperated, and anytime, this is what I always say, in Brawley, anytime you have beer, tacos, wrestling, you're going to have a big crowd. And that's
crowd,
exactly
beer, tacos, and
what ended up
wrestling.
happening. And so
Not
it's,
necessarily in that order.
and it doesn't have to be in that order, It could be, tacos, beer, and then wrestling, or,
Wrestling,
whatever.
beer, and then
But
tacos.
a lot of fun. I was able to referee one of the matches. It was a whole lot of fun. I enjoyed myself, and, it was, they kept it clean and fun and entertaining for everyone. So people enjoyed it. and I got to, I
Heard you
saw.
got in on the action.
Yeah, that was fun. And so, I did hear part of the video. Somebody was yelling at me because I was too slow on
Oh,
the
yeah,
count,
that's-
you
I
know,
heard
so
that.
it was pretty funny. But at any rate, that was a lot of fun. I'm glad that the event was successful. One of many events that are successful, and I'm happy to see that, you know, we're having more and more downtown events. We have for many years now, and you know, to include even the Cesar Chavez event that took place a couple weeks ago. So that's my report. Thank you all again, and we'll move on to the city manager's report.
3 quick items. Want to mention my thanks and gratitude to Rosa for a very long weekend. She and our city treasurer put in some very long hours yesterday and Saturday. And we called in for backup from Shirley part of yesterday as well. And it was, you know, I hope the level of detail hopefully wasn't too painful, but really the intent is to be prepared for questions and what kind of next steps the council has in mind. So my thanks
If I could
to staff.
interrupt
Yes.
for just a second, I would like to thank you as well. And I would like to just give you both a round of applause for the work that you did, because I know sometimes, you know, we see these reports and they go unnoticed as far as who put the work together, but I know that there's a tremendous amount of work that goes into them. And unless you're out there saying, hey, I worked on this, council doesn't necessarily recognize that. So I certainly want to know, let you know that we do appreciate that. So thank you. Sorry to interrupt you.
So unfortunately, it was maybe 15 hours that we didn't have during the work week because of other daytime demands that are coming in the door. So thank all of our department heads who took phone calls from me as well this weekend, because there were a few of you as we were testing assumptions and trying to make sure that we had the facts fully compiled. I have been exploring a number of alternatives with some of our airport commissioners as it relates to the FBO. So want to make sure council is aware. I think you will be in receipt of a letter in the very near future that requests a change in the way we approach the services that are associated with the FBO. I hope to work with Guillermo on developing some related stats for your consideration as it relates to that. But probably most importantly is me being sure to underscore that we have our current FBO that's given us notice. So as a result of some potential changes in the configuration, we're going to have a period of time where an FBO is not in place. So we'll do our best to try to keep it on the fast track, but want to talk with all of council about what this model could look like and what is being requested by the users of the airport. Lastly, one of the things that I think was evident in today's conversation is for budget discussions is, you know, throughout the fiscal year, we do a lot to support special events behind the scenes. And because we have relied so heavily on just cooperative spirit and not the letter of the policy that we have on the books, we have stopped really honing in as clearly as we would any other weekend work on what it actually costs for us to deliver events. So I would like to prepare a departmental report that comes to councils, and maybe we could draw on 2 examples of real data to show you road closure, overtime, Parks and Rec personnel and Public Works, and then if we have an additional detail that's assigned versus not assigned. Because some events, like Mariachi Night, we have an additional team roving, but otherwise, our special events, we're just working with the people who are on patrol, and then if there's alcohol involved in the event, there's a security requirement that's associated. But there's a lot of pieces that, because we stopped charging a lot of years ago, we stopped really accounting for it. And as we get tighter and tighter with the budgets, it's harder and harder for our community members to understand when we're saying, no, we can't do that, because we've exhausted the budget. So if we can bring that item to you, I think it'd be really helpful and eye-opening for everyone to see what it really costs us.
I think that's important too.
I would bet, and I'd love to see some analysis on the part of the chamber. I don't know if we have any chamber members left, but I have some strong doubts as to sales tax generation, because that's
Yeah.
goods and services. It
Yeah.
really is it's a wonderful community gathering activity, but it does not generate, it generates
And that
costs,
was
not
the emphasis
revenues.
of the Main Street committee that, I was a member of for many years. But the problem was that businesses didn't stay open.
But
you know,
maybe
and so-
Inferno and Patty's at the
Yeah.
Rock had great
may have-
evenings.
they-
I
they
didn't
did,
head
they
over
did.
there to see what that was like, but
They
I
have
heard it was
been when
full.
there's been events,
Sure.
right?
But they've also had great evenings on their own as well.
Yeah.
So,
Yes.
you know,
Yeah,
I,
that's
I,
true.
I think there was a comment made that Inferno had indicated that their business was up 40% due to the
cool.
event. And so
Weather
that's
was
probably means additional sales tax revenue to the city. I just don't know how
Well, it's food.
how we
It's
analyze
food.
it. That's food though,
Yeah.
although I don't know if you
Goods
pay
and-
tax.
Yeah.
Yeah, you see, you don't pay on
It's-
that. Yep.
When you look at who are sales tax generators, you don't normally see restaurants.
Yeah.
It's really, and there's confidential information that the Board of Equalization shares with us. It just can't be disseminated publicly. I'd be happy to work with any of you to show you what we have, what we see as revenue generation.
Yes.
Versus what is, it's
Yeah.
not a source for us.
Yeah.
Is there a tax on alcohol also, or not?
Not that we realize. There are occasionally there's something at some of our restaurants that's chargeable, but it's very small amounts.
small
amount.
It's not a,
So it's just on the food primarily?
no.
No.
No, not
No.
even?
No, food doesn't.
No.
Not even, so that's true. Okay.
Any
Happy
other?
to bring that to you in the future. That's it.
All
Thank you
All
very
right, our
much.
city attorney? Nothing. Our city clerk?
Just a reminder, if you guys want to go to the gala night for Desert Cancer Resources. that'd be nice.
All right, so if anybody would like to attend, please let Alma know.
This
On this
Sorry,
Saturday.
what was that?
Norma's going. but-
Yeah.
Cancer
Can
research.
can we get an
Yeah,
update
I'm
on our
gonna go with
budgets
that.
as well, just to see what's left within our
Yes, I
individual
was gonna
budgets,
call you
please?
and find out where we were on that.
Our current
gonna be
worksheets
taking
show
it.
where you are, the what's in
For
there.
individuals?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, good.
Well, to March, okay, so
Okay.
not April. Yeah, but that's.
All right, thank you. Well, everybody, thank you all very much. I'm going to adjourn this meeting until,
Rosanna, just for clarification, I'm sorry, the sales tax, because we do pay sales tax when we go eat at a restaurant, so,
I'd be happy to show you the amounts.
but we get, it's very little is what you're saying.
Right,